Joshua Powell was born on January 20, 1976, in Puyallup, Washington, to Stephen and Terica Powell. He had 4 siblings: Michael, John, Jennifer, and Alina. However, life in the Powell family was far from normal. Their father, Stephen, was controlling and inappropriate, fostering a toxic atmosphere for his children. He shared adult material with his sons and set no boundaries, exposing them to adult content that influenced their behavior. As a teenager, Joshua acted out violently. He once killed his sister's pet gerbil in a fit of anger. He also threatened his mother with a knife during an argument, and when he felt desperate, he threatened to harm himself. In 2000, Joshua met Susan Cox at a church dinner. She was kind, hardworking, and full of life, and they got married within a year. Unbeknownst to Susan, her marriage would encounter serious challenges. Initially, they lived with Joshua's father, Stephen, in Washington, and that was when things became really disturbing. Stephen began to obsess over Susan. He watched her with a camera, used a small mirror to look into the bathroom, stole her underwear from the washing machine, read her diary, and posted love songs online under a pseudonym. Finally, one day, he confessed his feelings to Susan. This conversation, which included Susan's panicked rejection, was accidentally recorded on his own camera. It became the final straw. Joshua and Susan decided to pack up and move to Utah, hoping to forget about Stephen. For a while, life seemed to stabilize for Joshua and Susan, who had 2 sons named Charlie and Braden. They relocated to West Valley City, Utah, in search of a fresh start. However, Susan felt increasingly suffocated in her marriage. Her friends noticed her unhappiness and learned that Joshua hardly showed her any affection, creating a sense of distance between them. By the summer of 2008, their situation had deteriorated significantly. Joshua and Susan argued constantly, even in front of their children. Joshua had become extremely controlling, making all the decisions and leaving Susan feeling trapped. Their marriage was not just struggling, it was falling apart. He took complete control of their finances, forcing Susan to rely on him for even minor expenses. He reduced their grocery budget, refused to buy her new clothes, and required her to justify every dollar she spent. While he guarded their bank accounts, he had no issue spending money on himself, wasting thousands while Susan struggled to afford basic necessities. The issue extended to their vehicles as well. Although they owned 2 cars, Joshua claimed the family car as his own. Instead of allowing Susan to drive to work, he made her ride a bike, regardless of the weather or her fatigue. Moreover, he started to distance himself from their shared faith. Although they had been active members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Joshua began refusing to attend services with Susan and their sons. He mocked her beliefs, made excuses to avoid church, and discouraged her involvement. The most painful betrayal came when Joshua refused to sever ties with his father, Stephen, despite Susan's insistence that he was dangerous and unwelcome in their lives. Joshua ignored her concerns, continued to communicate with his father, and allowed their young children to maintain contact with him. By 2007, Joshua had accumulated over $200,000 in debt, adding to their marital strain as Susan recognized that their situation was worsening. In response, she began documenting everything. In 2008, Susan created a video documenting the damage in her home, which she attributed to Joshua. That same year, she wrote a secret will ominously stating that if she were to die, it might not be an accident, even if it appeared to be one. Just a year later, she disappeared without a trace. On December 6, 2009, everything seemed normal. That morning, Susan, Charlie, and Braden went to church as usual. Susan interacted with friends and tended to her boys, and nothing appeared out of the ordinary. After church, a neighbor visited the family and spent some time with them before leaving. No one could have predicted that this would be the last time anyone would see Susan. The following morning, December 7th, something felt off. Susan didn't show up for work and hadn't called in sick or requested a day off. At the same time, the boys' nanny noticed that Joshua hadn't dropped them off, which was unusual for him. Concerned, she tried to contact the family, but no one answered. As hours went by without any word from Susan or Joshua, worry turned to fear. Joshua's mother, Terica, and his sister, Jennifer, learned about the situation and rushed to the house. When they arrived, they found the doors locked, the curtains drawn, and no one inside. The unsettling silence heightened their anxiety. They knocked and called out, but received no response. In a state of panic, they called the police. Officers arrived and forced entry into the home, fearing that the family might have been victims of carbon monoxide poisoning or faced another emergency. What the officers discovered inside the house was deeply concerning. Although the house was empty, something felt wrong. Susan's purse, wallet, and identification were still there, untouched. Her cell phone was later found in the family's only car, a Chrysler Town and Country minivan that Joshua had been using. It was turned off. There were no signs of a struggle, but one detail stood out. 2 box fans were set up in the living room, blowing air directly onto a damp spot on the couch. This unusual detail felt unsettling. Hours later, around 5 p.m., Joshua returned home with his sons, Charlie and Braden. The police quickly brought him in for questioning. His explanation was strange. He claimed that after midnight on December 7th, he took his 2 young sons, ages 4 and 2, on a spontaneous camping trip to the Pony Express Trail in western Utah, a remote area characterized by snow and freezing temperatures. He mentioned that Susan stayed home to sleep. His story raised many questions. Who would take toddlers on an impromptu camping trip in sub-freezing weather in the middle of the night, especially when they had work and daycare to prepare for in just a few hours? Police found it suspicious that Joshua had not notified his boss about not coming to work that day. When asked why, he gave a puzzling answer. He claimed he had lost track of the days and thought it was Sunday instead of Monday. Investigators aimed to confirm his story by sending a team to the area where he claimed to have camped. However, they found no evidence to support his claim, no tire tracks in the snow, no footprints, no fire pit, nothing. It was as if he had never gone on that trip. Things took an even stranger turn. On December 8th, after a second police interview, Joshua suddenly rented a car from Salt Lake City International Airport and then disappeared for nearly 18 hours. His whereabouts during that time remain unknown. When he finally reappeared, he called his mother from Interstate 84 in Tremonton, Utah, sounding disoriented and giving vague answers about his location. Later, he told his sister Jennifer that he had been driving around the city aimlessly, randomly getting on and off different freeways. When police examined the rental car, they found that he had added 87 miles to the odometer. Where did he go? What was he doing? No one knows, but it was becoming increasingly evident that Joshua was concealing something. 2 days after Susan went missing, the police conducted another search of her home. This time, they found something concerning on the floor, traces of Susan's blood. While it wasn't a large amount, it was enough to raise serious questions. Inside the house, they also discovered life insurance policies totaling $1.5 million and a handwritten letter from Susan. In the letter, she expressed her growing fear for her life and mentioned being terrified of Joshua. Years later, DNA tests confirmed that one blood sample belonged to Susan, while another matched an unknown male, whose identity remains unknown. As the police investigated Joshua's actions following Susan's disappearance, his behavior appeared increasingly suspicious. He emptied her retirement accounts, canceled her chiropractic appointments, and withdrew his sons from daycare, all within days of her vanishing. It seemed he was trying to erase her from their lives. Additionally, Joshua had previously talked to co-workers about how to dispose of a body in an abandoned mine shaft. At the time, people dismissed it as a strange comment, but now, it seemed more significant. As investigators worked to understand what happened to Susan, they questioned the only other witnesses present with Joshua that night, his sons. 4-year-old Charlie was interviewed, and surprisingly, he confirmed that the camping trip took place. However, his account included a significant twist. He claimed that their mother was with them. According to Charlie, Susan was in the car that night but never returned home. Weeks later, a teacher overheard Charlie make a chilling remark, stating that his mother was dead, without any details or explanations, suggesting he had come to accept this reality. Additionally, Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, reported a troubling incident. At daycare, Charlie's younger brother, Braden, drew a picture of a van. When asked about it, Braden pointed to the back of the van and said, "Mommy was in the trunk." This raised further suspicions for the police, who were becoming increasingly convinced that Joshua was aware of what had happened to Susan. They intended to bring Joshua in for further questioning and requested all footage of his interviews with local news outlets. However, Joshua showed no willingness to cooperate. On December 14th, he obtained legal representation. In the following days, he became more distant and less responsive to the authorities. Just before Christmas, he gathered his sons and left Utah, returning to Puyallup, Washington, to live with his father, Stephen Powell. By December 24th, police identified him as a person of interest in the case. Sadly, the situation was far from resolved. In 2010, Joshua moved into his father's house in Puyallup, bringing his two young sons, Charlie and Braden. Joshua made it clear he wasn't returning to Utah, announcing plans to rent out their home in West Valley City. Some reports indicated he left due to losing his job, but those who knew him felt he was fleeing from something. Shortly after settling in Washington, a website called SusanPowell.org emerged. It claimed to be the official site for Susan Powell, but instead of helping to find her, it focused on defending Joshua. The site accused Susan's family, including her sister Jennifer Graves, and even the LDS Church of conducting a smear campaign against him. Some posts went so far as to suggest that Susan had fled to Brazil with another missing person, journalist Stephen Kocher, a completely unfounded theory. It didn't take long for people to suspect that Joshua and his father, Stephen, were behind the website. Then, by late 2010, the Powells made a startling claim. They suggested that Susan had been mentally ill and had intentionally abandoned her family. This seemed like a desperate attempt to change the narrative, but Susan's parents quickly rebutted it. There was no evidence to support the idea that Susan left on her own or that she was mentally unstable. While Joshua tried to portray himself as the victim, the police began focusing on his father, Stephen. A family friend revealed that Stephen had been obsessed with Susan for years. When investigators examined Stephen's computers, they discovered 4,500 images of Susan, many taken without her consent. These were not just ordinary photographs, they included disturbing close-ups of her body. Police began investigating Joshua's brother, Michael Powell, after he displayed suspicious behavior. Shortly after Susan went missing, he sold his broken Ford Taurus to a junkyard in Pendleton, Oregon. This raised eyebrows, especially when he later requested satellite images of the lot, seemingly to monitor the car. When authorities tracked it down, they used cadaver dogs, which indicated that human remains had once been in the trunk. Unfortunately, DNA tests did not yield conclusive results, leaving a key question in the case unanswered. In September 2011, police thought they had a significant lead. While searching Topaz Mountain in Utah, a location frequently visited by Joshua, they discovered what looked like a grave site. The ground appeared to have been recently disturbed and showed signs of digging. Investigators spent several days examining the area, but ultimately found no remains. Meanwhile, tensions between the Joshua families and the Susan families escalated. After police searched Stephen's home, both he and Joshua took to the media to advocate for their side of the story. Stephen claimed that he and Susan were developing a romantic relationship before her disappearance, using old journal entries from her teenage years to argue that she had always been unstable. A judge did not accept this narrative. He ruled that Stephen and Joshua could not publish any of Susan's personal writings and ordered them to return or destroy any journals they had already made public. Then the situation escalated. On September 22, the police arrested Stephen on charges of voyeurism and child abuse. Investigators found secretly recorded videos in his home featuring young girls, adult women, and, most alarmingly, Susan. It was apparent that Stephen posed a serious danger, and authorities began to suspect that Joshua might not be innocent either. John Long, Washington's Assistant Attorney General, announced that Joshua was now part of the investigation. The day after Stephen's arrest, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, filed for custody of his grandchildren, Charlie and Braden. Initially, the court granted him only temporary custody, allowing Joshua the opportunity to regain custody if he moved out of Stephen's home. Joshua rented a house in South Hill, Washington, presenting it as if he were complying with the order. However, authorities later claimed he never actually lived there. By this time, Joshua's sister, Jennifer, publicly expressed her belief that he was involved in Susan's disappearance. As the custody battle escalated, the court ordered Joshua to undergo psychological evaluations. A forensic psychologist, James Manley, evaluated Joshua and discovered concerning patterns. Joshua denied having any normal human flaws or weaknesses and displayed highly controlling behavior toward his sons. He also exhibited signs of deep paranoia, frequently blaming the police and media for his difficulties. Despite these findings, there was no direct evidence of abuse. Therefore, Manley allowed Joshua to visit his sons several times a week under the supervision of a social worker. However, in January 2012, everything changed. When examining computers seized from Joshua's home, police found about 400 images of child abuse, bestiality, and incest. The images had been cached from a previous owner, but Joshua had viewed them. Although they weren't illegal, the psychologist handling his case was deeply concerned. Joshua was ordered to undergo a full psychological evaluation and a polygraph test. As the pressure mounts, Joshua becomes desperate and is about to commit a horrific act that no one could have imagined. On February 5, 2012, social worker Elizabeth Griffin Hall pulled up to Joshua's house in South Hill, Washington, for what was supposed to be a routine supervised visit between him and his two young boys, Charlie and Braden. The court had ordered these visits to be monitored for the children's safety, so Hall was there to ensure everything went smoothly. However, the moment she arrived, something felt off. As soon as the boys reached the front door, Joshua yanked them inside and slammed it shut right in Hall's face. She barely had time to react before she heard the deadbolt click. She pounded on the door, shouting for him to open it, but he didn't respond. Panicked, she pulled out her phone and called 911. Her voice shook as she told the dispatcher what had just happened, that she was supposed to be supervising the visit, that Joshua had locked her out, and that she feared for the boys' safety. She begged them to send help quickly. Immediately afterwards, a terrible explosion occurred, shaking the house. The force of the explosion propelled Hall backward. Within seconds, flames erupted, engulfing the home in thick black smoke. The intense heat scorched the air around her, leaving her immobilized by fear. Neighbors rushed over, some shouting and others already calling emergency services, but it was too late. The fire spread rapidly, and there was no chance for anyone inside to escape alive. Investigators later confirmed their initial suspicions. Joshua had planned this act. It wasn't an accident or a tragic gas leak. He had doused the house in gasoline, turning it into a death trap. Officially, Charlie and Braden died from carbon monoxide poisoning, but the reality was more horrific. Joshua had attacked them with a hatchet before starting the fire. The day before the tragedy, he emptied his bank account, donated the boys' toys to charity, and sent cold, emotionless goodbye emails to family and friends. Charlie and Braden were buried beside their mother, whom they would never see again, but their family's struggle continued. A year after Joshua took the lives of his two young sons and himself, his brother Michael tragically followed suit. On February 11, 2013, he ended his own life. His ending his own life sparked even more suspicion. In 2012, police questioned him several times about his abandoned Ford Taurus, which was found at a wrecking yard in Oregon. When asked why he left it there, he was vague and did not provide clear answers. Investigators later indicated they believed both Joshua and Michael were involved in Susan's murder. Despite extensive searching, Susan's case remained unsolved and hopeless. By May 21, 2013, the West Valley City Police officially closed the investigation into her disappearance. In the same year, James Manley, the psychologist who assessed Joshua for the state of Washington, acknowledged that he had always suspected Joshua was connected to Susan's disappearance. However, he did not include these suspicions in his official report, as his role was to evaluate Joshua's parenting, not to investigate a crime. The legal dispute over Susan's estate continued for years. In March 2015, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, finally prevailed in a lengthy legal battle against Terica and Alina Powell, who had attempted to declare Susan legally dead in order to collect life insurance. As a result, Chuck gained full control of the estate. In 2019, a surprising revelation came to light. KSL, a radio station in Salt Lake City, reported on its detailed podcast about Susan's case, called Cold, that disturbing child abuse material found by West Valley City Police, which contributed to Joshua losing custody of his sons, did not actually belong to him. In fact, it wasn't even found on his computer. The explicit images were located on a second-hand computer that Susan had bought from fellow members of her LDS church. The previous owners had viewed the content, but by the time this information surfaced, it was too late to rectify the situation. The damage had already been done. In early 2022, there was one final attempt to locate Susan's remains. A team led by Dave Sparks, known from the TV show Diesel Brothers, searched a remote mine shaft in the Utah desert in hopes of bringing Susan home. They discovered rib bones, what looked like human vertebrae, and pieces of clothing, indicating that someone had died there. The remains were sent for DNA testing, but once again, there was no success. The bones did not belong to Susan, and they were not even human. A pair of pants found with the remains tested positive for male DNA, raising another question: to whom did they belong? More importantly, will Susan Powell ever be found? Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Claudia Ornisi. On the morning of July 21, 2011, Stefan contacted the police in Cremona, Italy. Stefan, a resident of the city, had a daily routine of visiting his daughter, Claudia, and his 2-year-old granddaughter, Livia, for coffee. He would spend time with them, chatting, discussing news, playing with Livia, and then continuing with his day. However, on this particular morning, Stefan was deeply alarmed when he couldn't follow his usual routine. Stefan called Claudia several times before going to her house, but she did not answer, which made him very worried. Soon after, he went to her house on Via de Galli, rang the doorbell and knocked on the door, but still no one answered. Using a spare key that Claudia had entrusted to him for emergencies, he entered the house. As soon as he stepped inside, he noticed a strange, overwhelming smell that resembled a gas leak. Holding his breath, he began checking the rooms, fearing the worst. When he entered Claudia's bedroom, he discovered her lying motionless on the bed. He tried to wake her by shaking her, but she didn't respond. In a nearby crib was his niece, Livia, also motionless and cold, like Claudia. In a state of panic, Stefan rushed to the neighbors for help. An emergency rescue team of doctors and police arrived at 8:30 a.m., but both Claudia and Livia were dead. Stefan was devastated, especially by the sight of his little granddaughter motionless, wrapped in her blanket in the crib. From the beginning, investigators suspected that Claudia had taken her own life and that of her daughter. However, some inconsistencies have emerged. First, the strong smell of gas was concerning. An expert inspected the apartment and discovered 4 small propane gas cylinders, the kind typically used for camping stoves. One was positioned right next to Claudia's head at the bed, while the other 3 were placed in the corners of the room. It appeared as though she had intentionally filled the room with gas to end her life painlessly. The question, however, is whether 4 small cylinders could release enough gas to reach lethal concentrations in an uninsulated room to kill both Claudia and Livia. The apartment showed signs of ordinary disarray, consistent with a home shared with a young child. On the kitchen table, detectives found 10 nearly empty packages of Xanax, each originally containing 10 pills. Only 5 pills remained across all the packages. What caught their attention was how methodically the empty blister packs were arranged. They were stacked neatly in a row, almost as if placed that way intentionally to draw notice. This meticulous organization seemed unusual for someone in a state of despair and further heightened investigator suspicions. Any theories needed verification. What investigators uncovered revealed a disturbing scenario. Initially, they considered the possibility that Claudia had attempted to end her life. If she had ingested 95 Xanax tablets, an overdose could have been the cause of death. However, toxicology tests showed that the drug levels in her blood were too low for such an amount. While small traces of the drug were present, they were far from enough to indicate she had taken 95 tablets. The results suggested she had been sedated and lost consciousness. What is suspicious is that Livia's blood test showed the same result as well. Judging from the bedroom scene, it appeared Claudia placed the gas cylinders, sealed their nozzles with duct tape, and began filling the room with gas. She left her daughter in the crib and then lay down next to her. This appeared to suggest a planned suicide murder, but inconsistencies in the story began to surface. For one, Claudia's relatives were firmly against the idea of voluntary suicide. The woman had no known reason to take her own life. She had never suffered from mental illness, harmful addictions, or depression. Moreover, Claudia adored her daughter so much that even if she had wanted to take her own life, she would never allow her beloved child to die. This confidence undermined the detective's suicide theory. Given the circumstances of the victim's life at the time of her death, Claudia Arn was a 40-year-old single mother. She grew up in a warm, loving family environment surrounded by her parents and sisters. She was described as a calm, kind, and pleasant woman, full of life. Motherhood had been a dream come true for her, a way to fully embrace and express her femininity. Claudia had always cherished the idea of having a family and children. Everyone who knew her described her as a devoted mother and role model. It was unimaginable for those close to her that she would harm her child under any circumstances. Though Claudia had experienced challenges in her personal life, they were not significant enough to suggest she would take such a drastic step. No matter how hard the detectives tried to find solid evidence proving this was a voluntary suicide, doubts kept arising. Claudia simply did not have a clear motive to take her life, let alone harm her child. The longer the police analyzed the crime scene, the more discrepancies they uncovered with the original suicide theory. For example, detectives could not find garbage bags in the apartment, where the cardboard packaging for the Xanax blister packs should logically have been discarded. This absence seemed peculiar. If Claudia had decided to commit suicide, taking out the trash would hardly have been a priority. This observation only deepened the mystery further. The detectives questioned whether someone preparing to take 95 pills would also think about taking the time to throw out the trash. Additionally, they noticed that the control levers on the electric meter were lowered and its lid was left open. This also seemed inappropriate for Claudia's situation. However, it was speculated that she might have been afraid an explosion could occur if gas had been filled. Suspicions were further fueled and the autopsy results came in. According to the forensic expert, Claudia and her daughter died from gas poisoning after losing consciousness from the drugs. However, fire experts denied this possibility, given the level of propane saturation in the room. 4 gas cylinders were clearly not enough to kill 2 people. This added weight to the version involving a third party. Investigators began to suspect that Claudia could not have voluntarily left this life. It was alleged that gas poisoning occurred when bags filled with gas were placed on the heads of Claudia and her daughter. Evidence of this came from the characteristic adhesive tape traces found during a thorough examination of the bodies. In this case, only 1 cylinder per person would have been needed, but it was deemed impossible for Claudia to do this by herself. The more the detectives analyzed the evidence, the more obvious it became that this was murder. The suicide theory was quickly abandoned. When detectives inspected the gas cylinders, suspicions only grew stronger, as no fingerprints were found on their surface. The idea that Claudia could have carefully wiped every canister clean before placing it on the floor seemed absurd. While the use of gloves could justify this, no such gloves were found anywhere. Although they might have been discarded, there was no evidence to support this. Additionally, there were no fingerprints on the Xanax blisters either. This raises further concern, as removing 95 pills would inevitably leave a trace. It became increasingly clear that detectives were looking for a killer, or potentially multiple killers, who were involved in this crime. Investigators shifted their attention to the gas cylinders and Xanax, focusing on tracing their origin using the serial numbers on the packaging. The process was complex and laborious, as it involved not only the city of Crema but also the entire Lombardia region. Through a thorough investigation, they traced it to the town of Cariati, which has a shopping mall. There, they found a gas canister and Xanax that matched the shipments found at the crime scene. Records showed that the pills were purchased there on July 16, 2011, just 4 days before the tragic incident. However, the buyer paid in cash and used a non-personalized discount card, making it difficult to identify them. Nonetheless, investigators persisted and uncovered that the individual had used the card on July 19 to buy food and beverages in a nearby city. Fortunately, a store clerk remembered the customer, a grumpy man, estimated to be 45 to 50 years old, of average height and elegantly dressed. He spoke eloquently but did not provide his name. The July 19 purchases raised further suspicion, as the man bought adhesive tape, potentially used to secure the buttons on the gas cylinders, causing them to release gas automatically. At this stage, the man's identity was still unknown. Authorities were working to determine who might have had a motive to harm Claudia and her daughter. The evidence suggested someone close to Claudia, as there were no signs of forced entry, indicating that she had willingly allowed the person into her home. This led investigators to focus on people she knew well. Ultimately, they concluded that the prime suspect was her ex-partner, Maurizio Iori, a well-known ophthalmologist in Crema and the biological father of her daughter, Livia. Maurizio was a man of good reputation, with a successful career and a respected family background. Claudia had a brief but intense relationship with him, which started in 2008 when she visited him as a patient. Mauricio's polite, kind, and professional demeanor immediately appealed to Claudia, who was lonely at the time. She quickly developed feelings for him. Being a prominent and accomplished man, he soon invited her on a date, and his refined manners and attentiveness captured her heart. However, their journey toward happiness faced a significant obstacle. Claudia was single and free, while Maurizio was married with 2 children. From the beginning, this bothered Claudia, but Maurizio reassured her that his marriage was troubled and he was planning to get divorced soon. As their relationship deepened, they began meeting in secret, often traveling to other cities to avoid raising suspicion from Mauricio's wife. He explained that secrecy was necessary because if the affair were discovered, it could complicate the divorce process and division of assets. Claudia gradually felt trapped in the role of a mistress and started to question her place in the relationship. Conflicts occasionally surfaced, but Maurizio always managed to calm her down, urging her to wait until the situation was resolved. Her hopes for a better outcome were shattered in May 2008, when Claudia discovered she was pregnant. For Maurizio, the news was unwelcome and infuriating, as he made it clear he did not want children outside of his marriage. This heightened the tension between them, leading to their separation. Claudia pinned her hopes on the child, believing motherhood would bring her happiness and purpose, but instead, the pregnancy further deepened her struggles. After their breakup, Claudia began to see Maurizio differently. She realized he was never truly committed to building a family with her, but was only interested in having fun on the side. His politeness and kindness disappeared entirely. He pressured her to have an abortion, but she was shocked and devastated, so she refused and was determined to keep the pregnancy under all circumstances. For 3 months, Maurizio persisted in urging her to end the pregnancy, but Claudia held her ground. Eventually, he met with her again and made his intentions clear. His primary concern was protecting his reputation. He insisted that no one should ever find out about Claudia or their child. He demanded that she keep her distance and avoid contacting him. Claudia, however, refused to comply. Feeling deceived and betrayed, she was determined that her daughter would not grow up in secrecy or obscurity. Resolute in safeguarding her and her child's future, Claudia sought legal help to force Maurizio to recognize his paternity. As Claudia's pregnancy advanced, Maurizio finalized his divorce. To her dismay, she discovered he had started a relationship with another woman before breaking up with her. Even more shocking, this new girlfriend was also expecting a child. This confirmed Claudia's belief that Maurizio had been dishonest and deceitful toward her. In the meantime, he concentrated on safeguarding his own interests. He was preparing to marry his new partner, a wealthy woman who aligned with his social status. He feared that if information about his relationship with Claudia or the fact that he had a child out of wedlock were revealed, his career and reputation would be severely affected. He admitted this fear to Claudia frankly. On February 3, 2009, Claudia gave birth to her daughter, Livia. Over time, Maurizio softened slightly and agreed to provide limited support for Claudia and the baby, who lived with Claudia's parents. He pledged to pay $400 per month for Livia's expenses and purchased an apartment for them, covering its mortgage. However, he restricted himself to visiting his daughter only once a week. This arrangement strained their already tense relationship. Despite everything, Claudia remained hopeful, believing that Maurizio might eventually develop genuine love and affection for Livia, grow into his role as a caring father. The last scheduled meeting between Maurizio and Livia was set for July 20, 2011. Claudia's mother told the police that Claudia had been feeling unwell, and Maurizio planned to visit to support her. He suggested they have dinner featuring sushi, a surprisingly out-of-character choice for him. Claudia's mother immediately found his behavior strange. Maurizio disliked fish and had never stayed with them for more than an hour, let alone brought food or made thoughtful gestures. Additionally, he brought a package of sauce that police would later confirm he had purchased on July 19, 2011, a detail that would become critical in the subsequent investigation. Claudia's mother grew convinced that Maurizio was connected to what happened afterward. Her greatest distress came from Claudia's genuine belief that Maurizio was finally trying to put effort into their relationship. Claudia had been so optimistic about the dinner, even borrowing her mother's best items for the occasion. Tragically, those items were later found the next morning on the lifeless bodies of Claudia and her child. The police quickly launched an investigation and identified Maurizio as the main suspect, bringing him in for questioning. While denying any involvement, he voluntarily went to the station and stated that he had not been at Claudia's apartment that evening. He provided an alibi, claiming that on July 20th, he left his office at 6:30 p.m., got takeaway food, ate it at home, and then went to the cinema at 9 p.m. He said he paid for his movie ticket in cash and returned home to sleep after watching the film. Mauricio's alibi fell apart quickly. He claimed he didn't keep his cinema ticket, but police reviewed security footage and confirmed he wasn't among the 38 people leaving the session. His mobile phone data added to the inconsistencies, as it showed his phone had stayed near a beach house several kilometers away during the entire evening, contradicting his claim of being at the cinema. It became clear that Maurizio had lied about his whereabouts. When police questioned Mauricio's wife, she revealed that she had tried to contact him multiple times without success. Starting at 7:30 p.m. and continuing until 11 p.m., she repeatedly called him, but he never answered. She also tried reaching his office and friends, but no one knew where he was. Eventually, she contacted a neighbor near their beach house, who confirmed seeing Mauricio's car parked outside. Suspecting he was inside, the neighbor called him but received no response. Upon entering the unlocked house, it was empty, but Mauricio's phone had been left behind for the entire evening. As investigators searched the house, they discovered a note addressed to Maurizio, written by Claudia. The note revealed a shocking secret about Mauricio's illegitimate child. The neighbor, who noticed the note, alerted the police for further investigation. Later, Maurizio returned to the beach house around 2 a.m. and called both his wife and the police to assure them he was safe. However, his explanations only deepened suspicions. Police proceeded with the investigation, increasingly convinced that Mauricio's lies and attempts to hide the truth were unraveling. Based on the CCTV footage, he did not return to the beach house, which led investigators to believe that he was at Claudia's house during that time, confronting his daughter and his estranged lover. His alibi was shattered by his wife's nervousness, which further complicated matters. Maurizio, a well-known ophthalmologist, resorted to lying, raising even more suspicion. Evidence against him mounted rapidly. It was revealed that he had purchased multiple packages of Xanax at a shopping center in another city, paying in cash, likely to avoid detection. Store employees later identified him through receipts linking to online orders found on his computer, as well as from search history showing he had researched how to kill someone with propane or Xanax. He seemed particularly interested in the case of a Moroccan prisoner who died due to a propane gas tank. When questioned about these suspicious purchases, including gas cylinders, Maurizio claimed that Claudia had spoken about using them to heat baby food for Livia. However, the Supreme Court found this explanation unconvincing. Overwhelmed by the mounting evidence, he eventually confessed that he had not gone to the cinema that evening as he initially claimed. Instead, he admitted to visiting Claudia and stated that when he left, she and Livia were alive and well. He claimed to have no knowledge of what happened afterward. Maurizio justified his lies as an attempt to conceal his affair from his wife and mislead investigators. Nonetheless, his extramarital relationship, along with his deep resentment toward his daughter Livia, became widely known. During a police search of the house, officers discovered a dramatic letter detailing these incidents and emotions. Claudia described Maurizio as a ruthless and deceitful man who betrayed her. It was after the birth of her child that she felt the full weight of despair. Her frustration stemmed from Mauricio's cold and even cruel behavior toward the baby girl immediately after her birth. It seemed as though he viewed the child as inferior. At the same time, Claudia discovers that Maurizio has an illegitimate child and plans to marry the child's mother soon. The arrival of the baby left Claudia confused and hurt, unable to understand why Maurizio treated her and their child so poorly. It became apparent that he did not consider her his equal, had no intention of marrying her, and had no plans to remain a father to their child, Livia. Meanwhile, Mauricio's mother, Paola, played a dominant role in his life. It was clear that Maurizio was completely under her control. He feared her disapproval and, as an adult, would hide details about his personal life, relationships to avoid her judgment. Even though Paola was unaware of his affair and its consequences, he seemed convinced that Claudia would never gain his mother's acceptance under any circumstances. As a result, he kept Claudia a secret, but she began pressuring him nonetheless. His intentions and motivations were unclear, particularly since he consistently denied any wrongdoing. Most of the evidence in the case was circumstantial, and authorities were unable to locate the murder weapon. Investigators focused on finding a bag of trash from Claudia's apartment, believing it contained critical evidence such as gloves and pill packaging. Maurizio likely disposed of the bag. In her letter, Claudia hinted at being blackmailed, which may have cornered her. Meanwhile, Livia was mostly rejected by Maurizio and encountered hostility even before her birth. The tipping point for Mauricio's decision to kill Claudia and Livia appears to have been her demand that he take full responsibility for Livia, treat her as an equal member of his family, and stop belittling her. Maurizio saw this as a serious threat to his carefully constructed life, his reputation, financial stability, and, above all, his mother's approval. Financial issues played a significant role as well. Claudia did not work, leaving all her expenses to be covered by Maurizio. Evidence revealed that, 3 months before the murder, Maurizio had been researching ways to recover mortgage payments for the apartment he had bought for Claudia. This indicates that he meticulously planned the crime to minimize financial losses stemming from the affair. On the night of October 11, 2011, Claudia and Livia were waiting for Maurizio to visit, as planned. He arrived with sushi, soy sauce, and drinks, all of which had been laced with a sedative. Claudia dressed up and prepared her daughter for the evening, hoping to charm Maurizio and mend their relationship. However, he had come with the intention of committing a double murder. After dinner, Claudia and Livia lost consciousness from the sedatives. Maurizio carries them into the bedroom and stages the scene to make it look like Claudia has harmed her and her daughter. He placed gas-filled bags over their heads, sealing them with tape. Once they were dead, he cleaned the scene thoroughly to remove any evidence, disposed of incriminating items, and left. Around 3 a.m., he drove to his beach house. On October 14, 2011, Maurizio Iori was arrested and charged with the premeditated murders of Claudia and Livia. The trial shocked the public, as it was hard to believe that a respected doctor could kill his mistress and their child. Despite the defense's arguments and requests for a reduced sentence, the court found the crime to be carefully planned. In January 2013, Maurizio Iori was sentenced to life in prison. His lawyers appealed, but the Supreme Court upheld the sentence in 2015. He was also ordered to pay $600,000 in compensation to Claudia's family. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Maurizio maintained his innocence and continued to speak to journalists, describing the trial as unfair and claiming he had been framed by the authorities. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Mindy Berenyi. Mindy Berenyi grew up in a small farming town in Antwerp, Ohio, in a middle-class family. Her mother, Shirley, met her future husband, Andy, while she was still in school. At the time, Andy was 18 and had completed his auto mechanic training, while Shirley was 17 and still in high school. Their relationship progressed quickly, and they married just a few months after meeting. Shortly after their marriage, Shirley discovered that she was pregnant by another man she had dated before meeting Andy. She had not been unfaithful to Andy, it was simply the result of a previous relationship. Shirley hesitated for a long time, but eventually, Andy accepted both her and the baby as his family. The couple stayed together for 15 years and had 3 children during their marriage. 2 of the children were Andy's, while the eldest was from Shirley's previous relationship. However, after 15 years of marriage, they decided to divorce. Shirley, feeling she could no longer cope as a single mother, gave up custody of all 3 children. The children went to live with Andy, their father. Mindy always loved her father. However, disturbing changes began to disrupt her life. When Mindy was about 9 years old, her father called her into his bedroom and asked her to give him a massage. Years later, Mindy realized this was the beginning of the abuse. At the time, she did not fully understand what was happening and complied, even though she felt something was wrong. She later recalled that it did not feel like a normal massage. Eventually, Mindy refused to go to her father's bedroom. From that point on, Andy's treatment of her became much harsher. Andy began to manipulate his children emotionally, insulting them and even resorting to physical violence. This caused Mindy's brothers to leave the house. Andy eventually remarried, which seemed to improve the strained family relationships, but nothing truly changed. He continued to exert tight control over Mindy, especially as she grew older. Like any teenager, Mindy wanted to spend time with her friends, but her father would not allow it. His behavior became increasingly controlling and manipulative. When Mindy got a job at a nearby McDonald's, Andy kept a close eye on her. He tracked the mileage on his car when she drove, frequently searched her room, and even recorded and listened to Mindy's phone conversations. When Andy was away from home, he turned off his phone to prevent his daughter from communicating with anyone without his supervision. She wanted to stay in touch with her friends and live like a normal teenager, but this angered her father. He would eavesdrop on Mindy's conversations and immediately disconnect her phone from the network if he heard something he disliked. He demanded complete obedience from her, but Mindy refused to comply. When Mindy turned 16, Andy's behavior became increasingly dangerous. He would grab and strangle her when she resisted his control. He would throw her around and beat her while trying to avoid leaving any evidence. The situation worsened when Andy discovered she was pregnant, although the identity of the father was unknown. Mindy was devastated, unable to imagine raising a child in such a hostile environment. Her father's abusive behavior had become unbearable, and she feared for her life and well-being. That same day, Mindy stormed into Andy's upstairs bedroom and grabbed a shotgun hanging on the wall. She then ran into the bathroom, intending to take her own life. Andy was not home at the time, but by the time Mindy changed her mind and decided to put the shotgun away to avoid her father's detection, it was too late. When Andy walked in and saw his daughter holding the gun, he immediately flew into a rage. Mindy later said she was terrified and thought she was in serious trouble. Andy turned away to close the door, saying he would deal with her right away. Moments later, a gunshot rang out. At approximately 4:16 p.m. on September 27th, Joni, Andy's second wife, called the police. When police arrived at the scene, they found Andy lying on the floor. Mindy claimed that she had acted in self-defense. According to Mindy, she had endured years of abuse, along with constant psychological pressure and total control from her abusive father, Andy, who would punish her for even the smallest mistakes. In an attempt to defend herself, she accidentally shot and killed her father. Lawyers accepted her testimony and planned to fight for her acquittal. However, a significant challenge was that Mindy rarely spoke about her struggles or the abuse she endured. Her father, Andy, had restricted her interactions with others, only allowing her to communicate with others when he was supervised. As a result, she had no opportunity to confide in her friends or anyone else about her situation. Additionally, there were no bruises or injuries on her body. This lack of evidence created serious obstacles to convincing the jury that this was indeed a case of self-defense. Shirley, Mindy's mother, supported her daughter's testimony. Mindy had repeatedly complained about her father's abusive behavior, but Shirley had dismissed each time as isolated incidents. Mindy would then reassure her mother that everything was fine, leading her to believe that her daughter was exaggerating. Now, Mindy claimed that her father had threatened her, and Shirley admitted that Andy had behaved similarly throughout their marriage. While at the police station, Shirley revealed that she had also suffered abusive behavior from her husband, which was the main reason for their divorce. However, she did not expect that Andy would use the same tactics on their daughter. The situation became even more complicated when Mindy faced information isolation. She was unable to socialize comfortably with others and could only occasionally spend a few minutes on the phone without Andy's supervision. Despite everything, Shirley supported her daughter. Andy's second wife, Joni, who had been married to him for 8 years, defended him. She described Andy as a loving husband and devoted father, raising 2 sons and doing his best for his ungrateful daughter, Mindy. She saw him as a decent man who was unfairly labeled a tyrant to justify the murder. According to Joni, Andy spent much of his free time with his children, often taking them to the nearby river to fish and boat. This account was supported by all of Andy's neighbors. Joni described her husband as a hard-working man who devoted his life to his family. Andy's relatives were steadfast in their support of him, insisting that he was never cruel or manipulative. From the beginning, they described Mindy as an insecure and disobedient child whose negative traits worsened as she grew older. They portrayed her as a pathological liar and a rebellious individual who frequently tried to run away from home and even stole her father's car several times. Andy also suspects that she may be using illegal substances. Concerned about her behavior, he believes that strict rules need to be put in place to deal with the situation. Andy's relatives claim that this was not an act of self-defense, but rather a brutal and calculated murder by Mindy. They allege that she killed her father, a man who did everything in his power to keep his daughter out of trouble. Joni reported that Andy had blocked Mindy's phone. This was because Mindy had been calling her friends frequently, often planning to run away. He later discovered that Mindy had been skipping work, which led him to periodically check her car's mileage to ensure she did not lose her job at McDonald's. Andy also began searching her room after suspecting that she was smoking. Based on these actions, Andy's behavior appeared consistent with that of a controlling yet concerned parent. In the months leading up to the murder, Joni kept a diary documenting many of Mindy's disturbing behaviors. Mindy was described as a rule breaker. Joni's diary recorded every attempt Mindy made to run away, which had happened 3 times in the past 2 months. The diary also described how Mindy spent days lying in bed, drinking, and being dishonest. Because of this behavior, her loved ones found it impossible to trust her. According to Joni, Mindy's behavior was so out of control that Joni feared for her own safety. She overheard Mindy say things to her father that made her feel extremely insecure. This behavior continued for years. According to Joni, Andy only lost his temper once. On that occasion, he grabbed Mindy by the neck and pushed her against a wall. However, it was clear that he had no intention of harming her. Joni categorically denied that there was any abuse toward Mindy. She also stated that she never heard Andy insult his daughter, call her worthless, emotionally pressure her, or humiliate her, as Mindy had described. Joni was home when Andy died. She noticed that Mindy was acting strangely throughout the day but did not think much of it. Everything changed when Joni heard a loud bang. She immediately ran downstairs and saw Mindy pointing a gun at her. Joni quickly retrieved the gun, and no one was hurt. At first, she thought Mindy was just trying to get attention. However, when she went into the kitchen, Joni saw Andy lying on the floor near the entrance through the open door. She called out to him, but he did not respond. When she got closer, she realized he was dead. Mindy killed her father, whom she had hated for years, seemingly without any particular reason. Joni claimed that Andy had always tried to support and protect Mindy from the hardships of life. When the police arrived at the scene, they arrested Mindy and took her to the sheriff's office, where she tearfully confessed to the murder. At the police station, Joni stated that the act was intentional. She believed Mindy was manipulative and untrustworthy. The lawyers sought to damage Andy's reputation, as it was the only way to prove Mindy's innocence. From the beginning, Joni believed that Mindy was trying to deceive everyone to avoid responsibility for her terrible crime. However, the lawyers argued that Mindy had suffered years of emotional and physical abuse and only acted in self-defense when she felt her life and the life of her unborn child was in danger. Mindy, who had recently found out she was pregnant, was terrified, believing that her father would kill her if he found out. Mindy's strongest supporter remained her mother, Shirley. The prosecution presented a wealth of evidence, including a poem found in Mindy's notebook, which had been discovered in her nightstand. The poem described the murder and was accompanied by a small drawing of a bleeding heart being stabbed with a knife. According to the prosecution, this suggested that Mindy had carefully planned the crime. The prosecution argued that when Mindy took the weapon from her father's room, she did not intend to kill herself. Instead, they claimed that she had taken the weapon and ambushed her father. Forensic scientists determined that Andy had been shot in the back with a shotgun, refuting the claim that he had attacked first. He could not have attacked with his back turned. A neighbor testified on behalf of the prosecution, stating that he was about 40 yards from the house when Andy opened the door. The neighbor said everything was quiet, and he did not hear Andy swearing or making threats, contrary to Mindy's claim. According to the neighbor, Andy simply walked into the house, and 10 seconds later, gunshots rang out. The defense attorneys argued that Mindy had been overwhelmed and scared for her life, and that she had acted in self-defense as she prepared to become a mother at a young age. The defense presented a key witness, Mindy's mother, Shirley, who described Andy as a cruel and abusive manipulator who had mistreated her and her older sons. Shirley explained that Andy would force the family to sit at the kitchen table for hours, humiliating and insulting them while clearly enjoying their discomfort. She noted that throughout their marriage, Mindy had been spared from these attacks only because she was so young at the time. However, after Shirley left, Andy's anger turned toward his daughter. Things changed when Mindy turned 15 and called Shirley for the first time, saying she could no longer tolerate Andy's bullying behavior. During this time, Mindy's mental state became extremely concerning. She was admitted to a clinic, where she was diagnosed with depression and had attempted suicide. She stayed there for 9 days, was given medication, and was discharged after her condition was deemed stable. However, her father's pressure and abuse continued. According to Mindy, this caused her to develop paranoia. She felt trapped, like a prisoner in her own home, unable to escape her overbearing father. To cope with her fear and pain, she began drinking and smoking marijuana. This behavior eventually attracted the attention of social services. However, it was Andy who contacted them, hoping to address what he described as Mindy's disturbing behavior. Andy was surprised when Laura Alvarado, a child abuse investigator, sided with Mindy after speaking with her. Laura believed that Mindy was not being defiant or out of control. Instead, it appeared that the teenager was feeling anxious and threatened at home. Mindy had pleaded for help, even expressing a desire to move into a foster home to escape her father. She also revealed that her mother had refused to take her in, unwilling to intervene because of the custody agreement. To Laura, this seemed less like the behavior of a rebellious teenager and more like a child who felt trapped and hopeless. Laura had several conversations with Mindy, but during their last meeting, something seemed different and more troubling. Mindy appeared closed off and unwilling to open up. Laura suspected that Andy had threatened her, but further investigation revealed no solid evidence. The most anticipated part of the hearing was Mindy's testimony in her own defense. This was a high-risk strategy, as it could either persuade the jury to sympathize with her or push them in the opposite direction. The outcome depended entirely on whether the jury believed her. Initially, Mindy's attorney decided to take the gamble, arguing that only Mindy could prove who was telling the truth and who was lying. However, the odds were clearly against her. Ultimately, the defense counsel advised taking a safer route. Mindy agreed to a plea bargain, which resulted in a reduced sentence of 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Soon after, the situation changed. At age 20, Mindy had already served 4 years in prison and was now focused on seeking justice and regaining her freedom. During this time, the legal system had recognized mental distress as a valid defense, even in murder cases. This change provided a new perspective for Mindy's attorney. An appeal was filed and eventually accepted. However, the appeal came with significant risks. If the jury rejected Mindy's testimony, she could face life in prison, with a minimum of 33 years before she could apply for early release. Despite the high stakes, Mindy was determined to fight to clear her name. Both the prosecution and defense returned to present their cases, as they had during the first trial. Andy's wife, Joni, continued to grieve the loss of her husband and remained determined to prove that Mindy was responsible. At trial, Mindy recounted her traumatic experiences of enduring years of physical abuse at the hands of Andy. She described how he threatened her daily, constantly demeaning and humiliating her for seemingly trivial reasons. Desperate to avoid her father, she tried to limit contact, but living in the same house made that nearly impossible. Even brief encounters often escalated into conflicts and confrontations. The prosecutor's office repeated the arguments they had made during the first hearing. Mindy explained that she had chosen the bathroom to end her life, but she hesitated and was unable to go through with it. She discovered she was pregnant and felt a sense of responsibility for her unborn child. For an hour, she struggled with whether to live or die until she heard her father return home. At that moment, she realized she had lost the chance to return the gun to his room without being discovered. Mindy knew her father would be furious if he found out about her plan. Overcome with fear and emotional distress, she decided to protect herself and her child at all costs. Mindy also explained why she shot her father in the back. She said she had told him to check his answering machine, hoping to distract him while she quietly returned the gun to his room. But as she walked into the kitchen, she saw him begin to turn around and noticed the shotgun. Panicked and believing he was about to lunge at her, she pulled the trigger. The jury heard conflicting accounts. Andy's wife, Joni, and a nearby neighbor claimed there were no signs of a struggle or any screams for help, further suggesting that the killing was premeditated rather than an act of self-defense. At the hearing, an anonymous source revealed that a juror was biased. The juror had traveled from another state, motivated by Mindy's story. As a result, a new hearing was scheduled with a different jury. This time, the defense presented a new witness, Mindy's treating physician, during her first hospitalization for depression and end-life thoughts. The physician confirmed that Mindy was severely depressed and exhibited clear signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. She would flinch at the sound of any noise or footsteps. The psychiatrist supported Mindy's testimony that she had been humiliated and tortured by her father. Under the circumstances, her actions in self-defense seemed understandable, especially as she feared for her life and the safety of her child. Both sides presented strong arguments. However, the prosecutor's office held back a critical move. They introduced their own psychiatrist, who strongly disagreed with the conclusions of Mindy's treating doctor. Mindy faced a significant setback when her brother disputed claims of domestic violence in the home, allegations often made by both her mother and Mindy. Ultimately, after 24 hours of deliberation, the jury found Mindy Bereniite guilty of murdering her father. She was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 23 years. Mindy's lawyers were shocked by the outcome, as they had not anticipated such a harsh sentence. The fate of Mindy's child remains unknown. In an earlier interview, Mindy admitted she knew her actions were wrong but insisted that desperation and fear drove her to kill her father, whom she described as a tyrant. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Sungnam Kwan Lisowski. Our story today focuses on the Lisowski family. John and his wife Sungnam, along with their two daughters, Victoria and Christine, live in a town called Aurora in the United States. John's job requires frequent international travel, including trips to Korea, as the company's headquarters are in the United States while some factories are located in other countries. During one of these trips to Korea, John met Sungnam Kwan. He quickly fell in love with her and asked her out. After several dates, they decided to get married. They married in 1983 and moved to the United States. Their first daughter, Victoria, was born in 1988, followed by Christine a few years later. Although the family seemed perfect, some people found Sungnam too strict with the children. For a long time, John reassured himself that the strict nature of Asian parenting was normal, attributing it to his wife's cultural background. However, as tensions mounted, he began to realize that something was wrong. Sungnam's expectations of the children were too high, too strict, and sometimes even harsh. John's displeasure did not affect Sungnam much. She continued to impose more rules and insisted on their strict enforcement. Notably, the children were forbidden to discuss their family with anyone outside, even their friends. Meanwhile, Victoria and Christine socialized with friends and occasionally visited their homes. During these visits, they found that their friends' parents treated them much more kindly and warmly than the constant criticism they faced at home. While their friends' mothers would bake with them on the weekends, Victoria and Christine's mother decided on their interests without ever consulting them. Every weekend, she woke Victoria and Christine up at 6 a.m. and forced them to practice the piano, scolding them even if they made the slightest mistake. If they messed up, she would hit their hands. Victoria and Christine were never praised. Even if they played perfectly, there was no encouragement. Eventually, Sungnam had to use a wooden stick to discipline them. If they relaxed for a moment or hunched over, they would be beaten by her. John disagreed with this method of education. However, Sungnam achieved results. Victoria and Christine quickly mastered the piano, began to participate in competitions, and even won awards. However, deep down, they did not find joy in their achievements. Sungnam convinced John that her goal was to raise gifted children and that this harsh approach was necessary. Sungnam had a hot temper and would quickly lose control, leading to dangerous behavior. This created a tense atmosphere in the family, where even John felt uncomfortable around her. Sungnam firmly established her dominance in the family and made all the decisions. She often intervened in conflicts, even when she was not directly involved, relishing the role of judge. This situation took place during a conflict between Christine and Victoria. The two children were arguing about something trivial. Christine quickly apologized, but Victoria, the older sister, did not accept it. This made Sungnam unable to bear it. Ignoring Victoria and Christine's feelings, Sungnam became angry. She stood up, walked past Victoria, and began to punish Christine. Christine was confused and did not understand why she was being beaten. Sungnam hit her so violently that Christine's face was left bloody as she slid down the wall, unable to get up. Victoria watched in horror and began to scream an apology, begging her mother to stop. The beating only ceased when Victoria screamed. Sungnam then turned to Victoria and warned her that if she disobeyed again, Christine would be punished. She made it clear that she would hurt little Christine every time Victoria defied Sungnam, ensuring that Victoria would feel guilty about it. Many may wonder why John, the father of the children, did not step in to stop his wife and help his daughters. The truth is that John could not influence his wife, he was also the target of her anger. At the time of this incident, John was working late at the office, trying to avoid the increasingly tense atmosphere at home. This distance made it difficult for him to be involved in his children's lives. By the time John realized that the situation had escalated beyond normal limits, it was too late to intervene. While he was at work, his children were suffering from constant abuse at the hands of their mother. She often assaulted them. John was also involved in a number of disturbing incidents. On one occasion, Victoria went to a friend's house after school. There were obvious injuries on her body, and many suspected that something was wrong in her family, but Victoria remained silent. While she was at her friend's house, the phone rang, and Victoria was called home because something had happened. Victoria braced herself and returned to her house. As she approached, she saw her father standing at the door, talking to the police. He had a large, fresh bruise and a cut on his cheek that looked quite frightening. Victoria overheard her father's conversation with the police. He was making excuses, insisting that he had just fallen and that there was nothing to worry about. However, Victoria understood the truth of the situation. It was clear that after the initial violence, her father had tried to confront his wife to protect the children. Unfortunately, he was severely beaten, and Sungnam even threatened him with a knife. Since then, she had completely dominated the family. John was too afraid to speak up because he feared for his own safety. Sungnam's violent outbursts were terrifying. All the family members tried to keep their distance from her. John spent more time at work, trying to stay away from home as much as possible. He built a successful career, becoming the director of a telecommunications equipment company, and often traveled for work. Victoria and Christine followed suit, spending more time at school or with friends to avoid being at home. This situation continued until Victoria and Christine entered high school. During this time, the distance between John and Sungnam grew. He began working longer hours, taking extra shifts, and often left the house before everyone else woke up. He would wake up early and come home later than everyone else. Unfortunately, Victoria and Christine could not escape this situation. They were still stuck in a stressful environment with their demanding mother. During this time, the cruelty towards Victoria and Christine escalated significantly. One day, an argument broke out between the two sisters. Their mother, Sungnam, intervened by locking her daughters in a stuffy, dark garage. She forced them to sit with their hands raised for hours. When she finally opened the door, she found Victoria and Christine exhausted from the heat, but Sungnam chose not to let them out. Instead, she refused to give them water and simply closed the door again. It was later revealed that she had gone to the store, leaving her children in that miserable situation. Victoria and Christine sat for hours in the sweltering heat, feeling miserable but too afraid to go outside, knowing that it would only make their mother angrier. One day, while driving down the street, she lost control of the car, causing Victoria and Christine to bang on the door from the inside. They were confused by their mother's actions. Passers-by noticed her driving erratically, and when they approached, she claimed that the children were late for the bus, justifying her reckless speed. Witnesses described her as unstable, with wild eyes. In addition, Sungnam flaunted her wealth to make those around her jealous, even though she did not work. All her spending was done with John's money and credit. Sun Nam lost control of her finances to the point that John's steady salary was no longer sufficient. The situation became serious when they faced eviction due to unpaid utility bills and mortgage payments. Despite this threat, Sun Nam had no intention of stopping her spending habits. She continued to buy expensive items and frequented the city's posh clubs. John was unaware of the accumulated debts until it was too late. Sun Nam adopted a reckless lifestyle, spending her evenings at clubs while neglecting her children. When the threat of eviction became a reality, John could no longer bear the situation and made accusations against his wife. This caused her to react violently, leading to heated arguments that eventually escalated into physical violence. She hit John several times, forcing him to retreat to avoid hurting her. Despite his efforts to calm her down, she continued to attack him. In response, he grabbed her arm to restrain her until she calmed down, leaving marks on her wrist. Seeing the situation, Sun Nam decided to call the police. She claimed that her husband was abusing her. She misrepresented the facts, insisting that John had attacked her and that she had to endure constant verbal abuse and violence from him. Sun Nam continued to portray John as abusive and threatening. Finally, Victoria could no longer remain silent and informed the police that her mother had lied. She gave a truthful account of what had happened, as she had witnessed the entire conflict. Victoria explained that her mother had thrown the first punch, and even when John tried to calm her down, Sun Nam continued to act aggressively and threateningly. Faced with these conflicting stories, the police could only leave, suggesting that the family resolve the matter themselves. After the incident, nothing changed. Sun Nam continued to spend the money her husband earned. When John found out about this, he was furious and decided to confront her over the phone. Before the call, he had blocked her access to their accounts. During the conversation, Sun Nam lied and argued. He did not realize the potential consequences of his actions. When Sun Nam discovered that John had blocked her access to all of their accounts, she stormed into his office with a knife, threatened him, and cornered him. Faced with the threat of violence and with his children witnessing the chaos, John felt compelled to unlock the card. After this incident, John threw himself into work, taking more business trips to avoid his wife. To manage the expenses for the children and household bills, he was often away from home. In the fall of 2002, John went on a short business trip to China. During this trip, he met another woman and fell in love with her. John began looking for every opportunity to return to China to be with her and intended to divorce Sun Nam. On September 5, 2002, he emailed Sun Nam to inform her that he wanted a divorce. Although he had been struggling to fulfill his responsibilities as a father, he now wanted to take their children to China to be with his new girlfriend. He had a clear advantage over Sun Nam in that he had a stable income, while she did not. As a result, the ideal life she had tried to portray began to crumble. Sun Nam called John to discuss their personal problems. She was furious after receiving his message, and the news of his decision to divorce shocked her. He confirmed that he intended to initiate divorce proceedings as soon as he returned from his business trip. Sun Nam angrily threw the phone at Victoria, saying that their father wanted to take her and her sister to China. Victoria remained calm, picked up the phone, and told her father that this was a great plan, as living with their mother was unbearable. She expressed her eagerness to leave home and waited for her father to return. Sun Nam was acutely aware of the difficult situation around her. During the Christmas holiday of 2002, John returned from a business trip. At that time, Victoria was 14 years old, and her sister Christine was 12. John was 46 years old, and Sun Nam was 41. While everything seemed to be falling apart, Sun Nam noticed that everyone else was in a good mood. Despite being very angry, Sung Nam did not create any conflicts, which made Victoria and Christine feel uneasy. On the contrary, John appreciated the quiet atmosphere. When John returned from China, Sung Nam had completely changed. She prepared gifts for the whole family, dressed neatly, and decorated the house. She began serving drinks, creating a pleasant atmosphere. Sung Nam placed glasses for everyone and then stepped away to continue washing dishes. Victoria and Christine noticed something white at the bottom of their drinks but did not have time to warn their father before he finished drinking. Realizing that something was wrong, Victoria and Christine pretended to drink but secretly discarded their drinks. When Sung Nam left the room, they noticed that John seemed sluggish after drinking. He said he felt tired and went upstairs to sleep. Although Victoria and Christine had only taken a few sips, they also felt weak. They fell asleep until 8 a.m. the next day, December 25, 2002. Christine and Victoria woke up feeling unwell, not remembering how they had gotten to bed, but at first, there was nothing alarming. Victoria suspected that her mother had put sleeping pills in their drinks, although the reason was unclear. She felt relieved to wake up and find herself alive. Victoria and Christine decided to go downstairs to wish everyone a Merry Christmas. However, before they could leave the room, they heard a loud noise from the first floor that sounded like a gunshot. Earlier that morning, Sung Nam had sneaked into John's office, where he was working. She shot him once in the head from behind and then shot him 3 times in the back. Afterward, she went upstairs and stopped at the door. Victoria and Christine were horrified to see her reloading the gun. Sung Nam begged for forgiveness, saying that she had to do it, then pointed the gun at Victoria. There were 7 bullets left in the magazine. Christine, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly regained her composure. Seizing the moment, she grabbed the phone and called the police. Christine could wait for the operator to answer while Sung Nam reloaded. Christine tried to tell the police that there was a shooting in the house and provided the address. Soon, the police heard a series of gunshots as the call continued. Christine had to run away to escape her mother, who was about to shoot her. She ran into Victoria's bedroom just seconds before her mother opened fire. Christine was injured, but against all odds, both she and Victoria survived. She locked the door and waited for rescue, praying that her mother could not get in. Meanwhile, the patrol officers arrived at the house in emergency mode. Within minutes, they parked outside and heard several gunshots from inside, followed by silence. Unsure of what was happening, the officers cautiously entered the house with their weapons drawn. Inside, they first found John, who had been shot multiple times. Sung Nam shot himself behind a locked door, and she is unconscious. They also discovered Victoria and Christine, wounded but fortunately still alive. All 3 of them were rushed to the hospital. They were seriously injured and needed immediate medical attention. As they began to recover, the police interviewed them to gather information about the shooting. Sung Nam was in worse condition, but Victoria and Christine seemed to have little concern for her. On September 5, 2002, Sung Nam applied for a gun license. It took some time, but by December 17, she had legally obtained a pistol. Over the next week, she practiced target shooting diligently. This preparation suggested that the crime had been planned in advance. Sung Nam confided in her friends about her hatred for her husband and even mentioned her intention to buy a weapon to kill him. However, her friends considered Sung Nam's comments to be expressions of anger and did not believe that she would actually carry out her threat. The attack and Sung Nam's parenting made her friends key witnesses for the prosecution. Their testimony shocked both the jury and the experienced police officers. Sung Nam was sent for a psychiatric evaluation, which determined that she was fit to stand trial. The prosecution argued that Sung Nam had carefully planned the murder and attempted to kill her entire family, proving that she had intent and was of sound mind. Ultimately, Sun Nam Kwan Lisowski was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 45 years. Victoria and Christine were sent to live with their aunt and uncle. Throughout her incarceration, Sun Nam continued to misbehave and denied all charges against her. In 2008, Sun Nam confessed to her actions, saying that she could not accept the idea of divorce and was desperate to keep her husband, who had chosen to be with another woman. She admitted that she had tried to harm her children because she could not bear the thought of a stepmother caring for them. Sadly, in 2008, Sun Nam took her own life while in prison. Victoria and Christine wrote to her, hoping for a future reunion, but that day never came. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Graziella Monsi. The Monsi family had an 8-year-old daughter named Graziella Monsi, their only child and a long-awaited member of the family. They are businessmen who cater to tourists and have owned a shop for about 10 years where they sell nuts and dried fruits on the street leading to Castel del Monte. Their shop's prime location brought them steady and substantial income. Despite her young age, Graziella often helped her parents with the business, which made the family proud. Since childhood, she had been involved in their work, bringing energy and enthusiasm to the shop. The location was a bustling tourist area with a constant flow of customers, and her help was invaluable during busy times. Her cheerful and active nature left a lasting impression on customers who shopped there. One Saturday, a peak day for tourists, the Monsi family was hard at work, as weekends were typically their busiest. Graziella's grandfather often helped behind the counter during such busy periods, and she eagerly accompanied him to run small errands. That day, a large number of people came to Castel del Monte, keeping her grandfather busy at the stall, unable to step away. By evening, he grew tired and asked Graziella to go to the nearby fountain to fill a bottle with water. She happily agreed and left for the fountain, just a 5-minute walk away. However, her grandfather soon began to worry when she didn't return promptly. Graziella's grandfather comforted himself by thinking she might have met someone she knew and gotten distracted. However, after more than 20 minutes had passed and she still hadn't returned, he realized something was wrong. Worried, he walked to the fountain to check what might have delayed her. He was astonished to find Graziella nowhere to be seen, either on the road or near the fountain. He searched all the nearby streets carefully but couldn't locate her. Her disappearance seemed suspicious. The grandfather went back to the shop, hoping she might have returned through a different route, but she wasn't there. Roughly half an hour after she vanished, he informed her parents. Together, they began calling her friends and acquaintances, hoping someone had seen her. Sadly, no one they contacted had any information. Meanwhile, Monsi's entire family and some close friends gathered at the square near the store and began organizing a search. Less than an hour after Graziella vanished, the adults and teenagers divided into groups to search for her. The commotion caught the attention of passers-by and some tourists, prompting several volunteers to join the search effort. The Monsi family carried a photo of Graziella, asking anyone they encountered if they had seen her. A few people mentioned seeing a girl who looked like her earlier in the afternoon, but nobody knew where she might be or what had happened. The area was typically peaceful and quiet, making it hard to imagine someone attacking a girl in such a bustling location. After searching unsuccessfully for a few hours, the Monsi family reported Graziella missing at the local police station. The police acted quickly, and soon, the Carabinieri were involved in the search. Later, a witness approached an officer with a disturbing claim. He had heard a child's panicked cry coming from the wooded area near Castel del Monte. 2 police officers immediately went to investigate the location. When they arrived at the forest, they saw smoke rising from a fire. At first, they didn't think it was connected to Graziella's disappearance, but they decided to investigate to better understand the situation. Suspecting it might be a forest fire, they approached cautiously. As they got closer, about 10 meters away, they were hit by a distinct and horrifying smell: burnt flesh. Soon, the officers discovered a fire pit in the woods. In the flames, there were dry leaves burning, and underneath was what looked like a human body. To their horror, the body was child-sized, and the clothing matched the description of the dress Graziella had been wearing that day. The police immediately suspected the remains were hers. The fire had completely consumed her body, and she was found deceased. The area was thoroughly searched, but apart from fragments of Graziella's clothing in a lighter, likely used to start the fire, no other evidence was found to identify the perpetrator. Investigators decided to conduct a more thorough investigation of the area and aimed to collect surveillance footage from nearby cameras. A forensic expert later confirmed the grim discovery: the body was indeed Graziella's. An autopsy revealed that she had been deliberately murdered and burned. News of the incident spread quickly, making headlines the next day. Journalists flocked to Graziella's family, seeking comments on the tragic murder. When her relatives learned the full details of what had happened, they were in utter disbelief. They could not comprehend such a cruel and monstrous act. The entire community was deeply shaken. The media heightened public fear by extensively reporting on the horrific crime near the famous castle. This caused a sharp decline in tourist visits to the town, as people began to view the area as unsafe. The town's reputation as a popular destination suffered greatly, dealing a heavy blow to Andria's tourism industry. People are facing the tragedy and its lasting consequences. Meanwhile, investigators acted swiftly to find the perpetrator. From the very beginning, the police were determined to solve the case. Their primary theory was that a predator had enticed Graziella to leave the bustling tourist area and go to a more secluded location. There, he assaulted her and tried to cover up all evidence of the crime. Authorities initially believed that the attacker was likely an older, calculated, and experienced man. They began their investigation by reviewing a list of known criminals in the area who had criminal records related to abuse. However, as the case unfolded, this theory lost credibility. Investigators also considered the possibility that the perpetrator was a tourist who randomly targeted victims, including Graziella. To explore this, they analyzed tourist movements, but this idea also seemed increasingly improbable over time. As police interviewed witnesses, friends, and acquaintances of the Graziella family, one name kept coming up: Pasquale Tortora. He was a 20-year-old local man who worked illegally as a parking attendant on the same street as the Graziella family shop. Many people had noticed that since Graziella started working at the store, Pasquale had been observing her in a strange and unsettling way. Several individuals mentioned this, and their observations raised suspicions. When the police questioned Pasquale's friends, the concerns deepened. Some of his acquaintances had even joked that he seemed attracted to the 8-year-old girl. However, in the current situation, what had once been considered a harmless joke now carried a much darker implication. Could Pasquale have been a predator obsessed with Graziella? His family firmly denied this possibility, pointing out that he was raised in a respectable household and had no prior trouble with the law, at least, not until the tragic evening near Castel del Monte. However, despite his family's claims, Pasquale quickly became the main suspect. Investigators grew more suspicious after meeting with him. His t-shirt showed suspicious dark red stains, and his clothing was marked with dirt, as if he had been crawling or struggling on the ground. Additionally, his face bore small but clear scratches, resembling marks left by tiny hands in a desperate struggle. Pasquale, of course, denied any involvement in the attack on Graziella. However, during questioning by detectives, his testimony became increasingly inconsistent. He kept changing his story, which led investigators to suspect that he was hiding something. After just a few hours at the police station, Pasquale began to crumble under pressure. He then made a cold remark, stating that he found Graziella very beautiful, even though she was only 8 years old. Initially, he claimed that while walking in the woods, he stumbled upon Graziella's lifeless body already on fire. Frightened, He said he ran away, and the police showed up later. Later, he altered his story. He said he had seen Graziella heading to the fountain to fetch water. Since she knew him and trusted him, she wasn't afraid when he approached her. He emphasized that he had always acted calmly around her up to that point. Pasquale then mentioned that a dog had recently given birth to puppies in the nearby forest and claimed he had offered to show them to Graziella. This seemingly harmless excuse was the moment investigators grasped the horrifying reality of what had taken place. After breaking down completely, Pasquale confessed to his actions. He admitted to luring Graziella into the forest and, after committing the crime, setting her on fire to destroy any evidence. However, he denied intending to abuse her. Instead, he claimed his actions were part of a so-called Cato game, which had escalated beyond his control. The media quickly sensationalized the story, amplifying it with rumors and disturbing details. This overwhelming wave of coverage fueled public confusion. The true motive behind the murder remained unclear, as Pasquale's testimony was riddled with contradictions, leaving many questions unanswered. The police uncovered several inconsistencies in his account. His timeline didn't add up, and his explanations lacked credibility. One fact, however, was undeniable: the fire began around 10 p.m., but Graziella had already been missing for nearly 3 hours. So, what happened during that time frame? Later, Pasquale disclosed a chilling detail: he lit the fire after hearing people nearby in the forest. Believing they were searching for Graziella, he panicked and acted out of fear. However, the most horrifying discovery came from forensic experts. They concluded that she was still alive when the fire was set. Investigators continued to intensify their questioning of Pasquale. A troubling question emerged: how had he managed to commit such a horrific act while escaping with only minor injuries? Could he truly have acted alone? This led authorities to consider the possibility of an accomplice or even multiple accomplices, turning the focus of the investigation in a new direction. The police decided to interrogate Pasquale again. Eventually, he agreed to cooperate, admitting that fear had previously stopped him from revealing the entire truth. In his revised statement, Pasquale claimed that he never intended to harm Graziella himself. Instead, he stated that a group of young men, all aged 18 to 20, had coerced him. Pasquale identified 4 individuals: Michele Zagaria, Giuseppe Di Bari, Domenico Margiotta, and Vincenzo Corritella. He alleged that this group was waiting in the forest. According to him, there was no plan to harm or assault Graziella, but he had lost a bet with them. As a result, they pressured him to lure her into the woods. Pasquale recounted that when Graziella arrived in the forest, the 4 young men attacked her. They stopped her from escaping and forced her into silence. When they heard adults searching for her, they panicked. Fearing legal consequences, they decided to get rid of her. However, they didn't have any fuel to start a fire. Growing desperate, they tried to set her clothes on fire but failed. At one point, Graziella regained consciousness and screamed, prompting them to beat her again until she passed out. They tried to start the fire again, this time covering her body with leaves and using a lighter. The flames finally caught. All 4 young men came from respected families and had no history of violent behavior or serious crimes. Those who knew them described them as calm and well-mannered. Only one of them had a criminal record for a minor theft. Despite Pasquale's testimony, the idea that these 4 young men had decided to burn Graziella alive seemed unimaginable. However, once Pasquale provided their names, the police swiftly arrested them. News of their arrest shocked Italy, with the media covering every detail and fueling public outrage. From the beginning, the 4 suspects denied any involvement in Graziella's death. They claimed they had no idea why they were under investigation. Still, detectives remained determined to interrogate them until they uncovered the full truth about what happened that night. Unlike Pasquale, there was no physical evidence connecting the 4 men to the crime. When police searched their homes, nothing incriminating was found. They did acknowledge that Pasquale had an unhealthy obsession with Graziella, but they strongly denied having any part in her murder. Despite lengthy interrogations, none of the suspects admitted to any involvement. With no solid evidence against them, they were released but remained under close surveillance as the primary suspects. In a chilling development, the same 4 young men were later seen carrying Graziella's coffin at her funeral. Pasquale revealed that they were crying, appearing to be deeply affected by the loss. While detained, the young men claimed they were devastated because they recognized the young girl, often seeing her in the Monsi family's shop, even though they never spoke to her. The police suspected that their presence at the funeral was not coincidental. Although their connection to Graziella's family was minimal, they might have been burdened by guilt and sought some form of redemption. Alternatively, they might have been attempting to monitor the investigation into their possible involvement in the crime. During the next round of interrogations, the suspects were questioned separately. Vincenzo and Giuseppe claimed they had an alibi, supported by the testimony of young Luda. They stated that they had been at the city's gaming club on the day Graziella disappeared. Meanwhile, Michelle and Domenico refused to cooperate with the investigation, declined to answer questions, and demanded lawyers, which only heightened police suspicion. The detectives proceeded to verify Vincenzo and Giuseppe's alibi by visiting the gaming club. While their presence at the club was confirmed, they left after about an hour and were unable to account for their whereabouts afterward. As a result, investigators couldn't rule out their involvement in Graziella's torture. Unexpectedly, Michelle and Domenico confessed to the crime, largely corroborating Pasquale's account. According to their confession, the group invited them to the forest that evening, saying they wanted to play with fire. When Michelle and Domenico arrived, the others were already present. Pasquale was assigned to lure a victim and chose Graziella, a girl who, according to their friends, made him feel uneasy but seemed like an easy target. Pasquale later confirmed that he had discovered Graziella by the fountain while she was fetching water. He lured her by inviting her to see puppies that had recently been born in the nearby forest. Graziella, trusting and unsuspecting, did not imagine that this could lead to harm and agreed out of curiosity. Pasquale deceived and coaxed Graziella into following him. Since Graziella loved animals, she was eager to see the puppies, especially because Pasquale was someone she knew and trusted. She never expected such a cruel betrayal. The wooded area where the ambush was planned was nearby, about a 15 to 20-minute walk from where he first approached her. By then, her grandfather would have already begun searching for her. When they reached the location, Michelle, Giuseppe, Domenico, and Vincenzo jumped out from their hiding spots. Graziella was terrified. In that moment, she likely realized she had been trapped, but it was too late. She had no way to defend herself. While mildly intoxicated, the perpetrators continued drinking and seemed to take amusement in Graziella's fear. According to their later confessions, they claimed they didn't plan to assault her but merely wanted to torment and mock her, taking advantage of her vulnerability. Graziella was so frightened that she went into a state of shock. During the incident, their group accidentally caused Graziella to fall and hit her head against a stone. Initially, the group claimed they did not plan to imprison her. Their intention was to restrain her to scare her further, but she collapsed and lost consciousness. Believing she was dead, they panicked, fearing that she was already being searched for. Likely due to alcohol intoxication clouding their judgment, they decided to destroy all evidence of what had occurred. They thought setting a fire would accomplish this. Some claims by the suspects were partially supported by evidence. For instance, the forensic examination did not conclusively reveal any signs of abuse. Graziella was discovered wearing underwear. The condition of the remains was poor due to severe burns, which made it impossible to confirm or rule out abuse. The Carabinieri suspected that fire might have destroyed evidence, as hoped by the group. At the time, Michelle, Giuseppe, Domenico, and Vincenzo continued to insist that the incident had been accidental. The court finally decided the fate of the juvenile offenders. Vincenzo and Giuseppe confessed that they had gone to the forest because Pasquale invited them, unaware of what playing with fire meant. They claimed they were unwittingly drawn into something far more sinister. According to their testimony, They were horrified by what transpired and quickly left, not wanting to remain at the scene. However, they failed to realize that this dangerous situation would ultimately lead to police intervention. Their actions were driven by fear, either of the other participants or of the legal consequences they could face if accused of taking part. Despite inconsistencies in the group's accounts, the trial concluded with Pasquale Tortora receiving the lightest sentence, 30 years in prison. This was due to two key factors. First, he was the only member who cooperated voluntarily with the investigation. Second, despite extensive tests conducted by investigators, the evidence consistently showed that Pasquale was not the one who set Graziella's body on fire, although he actively participated in the abuse. Investigators concluded that the four criminals, Michele, Giuseppe, Domenico, and Vincenzo, were responsible for dumping the body, and they imposed severe punishment on them. Convicted of kidnapping, child abuse, and premeditated murder, they received life sentences in solitary confinement. This meant they would remain in prison for the rest of their lives without interaction with other inmates. During the reading of the verdict, Graziella's mother fainted and had to be assisted by her husband. At the same time, tensions erupted among the defendants' families, resulting in arguments. Graziella's relatives expressed satisfaction with the sentences, believing them to be justified, except in the case of Pasquale, who they felt had been punished too lightly for luring their child into the woods and sealing her tragic fate. The court's severe ruling angered Vincenzo and Giuseppe, both of whom maintained their innocence adamantly. Their fervent claims gained them some supporters who believed their protestations, but this did not lead to a successful appeal. 8 years later, Vincenzo Corratella, 27, ended his life, possibly out of despair or guilt over his actions. While in prison, he discreetly brought a rope cord into his cell and used it to end his life. Just days prior, his mother had visited him and continued to firmly believe in his innocence. However, he had already lost hope. On June 19, 2013, Michele's lawyer requested a retrial, citing alleged judicial errors and opposing the verdict. The court, however, denied the request. Pasquale's mother publicly apologized to the Monsi family for her son's actions, expressing her belief that he should fully face the consequences of his crime. Despite this, Graziella's mother rejected the apology. She responded firmly, stating that Pasquale should experience the same pain their daughter had endured. She held the belief that if he had not led Graziella into the forest, their daughter would still be alive. As a result, Graziella's parents primarily blamed Pasquale for their loss. Graziella Monsi's name remains etched in memory across Italy. Near Castel del Monte, a small tombstone commemorates her, featuring her name, photograph, and a brief account of her tragically short life. Locals and tourists often leave flowers and toys at the site, though it is most frequently visited by Graziella's close family and friends. 24 years after the tragedy, Pasquale Tortora was released from prison. His original sentence was reduced by 6 years due to good behavior. Now 44 years old, he is attempting to rebuild his life, though it is uncertain whether he will succeed. Among the group involved in the crime, Pasquale was the only one tried through an abbreviated process, which led to a lighter punishment. Following the incident, the boys who were involved severed ties with each other. Their relationships remained fractured, even after Pasquale's release. He has expressed deep regret, stating that not a day passes without him reflecting on the harm he caused to Graziella and her family. Pasquale admits that, if given the chance to turn back time, he would never have committed the crime. Throughout his ordeal, his family provided crucial support, helping him endure that dark period and rebuild his life, a kindness for which he remains deeply grateful. Dasha, Graziella's mother, strongly objected to Pasquale's early release, claiming that it weakened the integrity of the law. She believes that individuals like him remain dangerous to society, are incapable of change, and should not be given second chances. Vincenzo and Giuseppe, both maintaining their innocence, questioned why Pasquale acted as he did. Vincenzo tragically died, leaving behind a suicide note in which he insisted on his innocence and expressed anger at the injustice he had endured. He entrusted evidence to a trusted person to support his claims in the future but lost the will to continue fighting for his freedom. Giuseppe, Domenico, and Michelle remain isolated. Giuseppe continues to proclaim his innocence, spending his days reading the Bible. He has accepted his sentence and is not pursuing an appeal but firmly believes he will eventually be released when his complete lack of involvement in the murder is proven. His lawyer and family share this belief, as did the late Vincenzo. All three insist that Pasquale masterminded the tragedy. They assert that he lured Graziella into the forest, tortured her, and was solely responsible for the crime. Their claims are backed by evidence. Only Pasquale's body showed signs of a struggle, such as scratches inflicted by Graziella. His clothes had dirt and her blood on them, while the others had no such traces. Despite this, Pasquale received the lightest sentence and has been released. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Judy Southern. Sometimes, from the very beginning of an investigation, everything seems to work out. The Supreme Court might directly point to a criminal, but practice shows that they are not always correct. While they tried to connect one person to the crime, the real culprit was walking free. Judy lived in Manhattan, New York, USA. She was a young woman who worked part-time at the post office. She always focused more on family and children than on career success. However, she wanted to get an education. Therefore, after graduating from high school, she entered college and successfully graduated. During this period, she met Alan Southern. They began a relationship and then got married. Judy and Alan lived together for more than 6 years. They raised a child together. From the outside, it seemed that everything was fine in their family, until one day that destroyed the entire family idyll. On June 7, 2000, Judy was in a good mood as she went to work in the morning, delivering mail around the area. At about 3:30 p.m., she returned home and, as always, found no one there yet. Judy arrived first and was getting ready for her husband to return from work. She had a 5-year-old son who was visiting his grandparents at that time. The boy was supposed to return in the evening. Once inside, Judy immediately noticed a strange mess on the kitchen table and found a suspicious note. She remembered that no one was there when she left for work. No one from the household could have come and left a message. Her husband was at work and never showed up during the day. Judy didn't have time to figure it all out, began to read the note, which turned out to have quite disturbing content. While she scanned the piece of paper, a stranger came out of a dark room and headed towards her, weapon at the ready. Without warning, he attacked her twice. The first bullet missed, but the second hit Judy in the lower abdomen. She fell to the floor and screamed in pain, losing consciousness. When she came to her senses, the attacker was nowhere to be seen. Judy barely reached the phone and tried to call her husband for help. But the phone was not working. She wanted to get to her mobile phone but could not remember where she left it. Fearing that the stranger might still be nearby, Judy crawled to the front door and carefully opened it. She stood up, leaning against the wall, left the house. Judy tried to attract the attention of others to scare off the criminal. She was bleeding and managed to walk only a couple of meters before she fell down exhausted. She knew her husband would be finishing work soon and would be near the house. That is exactly what happened. A few minutes later, he drove up in his car and immediately noticed his wife lying on the ground near the house. Judy was covered in blood but still alive. Alan picked her up and placed her in the back seat of the car. Judy was weak but tried to tell him about the attack. She pointed to the courtyard, but her husband still didn't understand what she wanted. There was no time to figure it out. Alan realized his wife's condition could be critical. Driving towards the hospital, Alan dialed 911, informed them that he had found his wife wounded near their house and was heading to the hospital. He asked them to meet them on the way. Judy was still conscious, said that a man had attacked her. She mentioned the name like Barry several times, claiming he had set up an ambush. By the time Judy arrived at the hospital, she had already lost consciousness. Doctors urgently took her to the operating room, but she died right on the table before receiving help. Her twin sister, Trudy Smith, arrived at the medical center a few minutes later. Alan informed her about the attack. She hurried because she wanted to support her sister. However, she doesn't have enough time. When Trudy received the tragic news of her sister's death, she approached Alan and accused him of what had happened. Alan seemed embarrassed. Trudy vowed to bring him to justice. The police immediately spoke to Alan, who became the main suspect. Because, typically, the closest people are involved in such cases. From the very beginning, Alan referenced Judy's own words about the shooting and the ambush organized by a certain Barry. The problem was that he did not know a single person among her acquaintances by that name. Trudy also could not recall anyone by that name. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined the crime scene and managed to find a considerable amount of evidence confirming that someone had indeed set up an ambush there and spent a significant amount of time in the house waiting for the victim. Such persistence seemed to indicate hatred, anger, and a personal motive. This only confirmed to the detectives that the criminal should be sought among the victim's immediate surroundings. Nothing was stolen from the house, so the robbery theory was immediately excluded. Mysterious Barry had taken a shower, played video games, and even found an adult toy belonging to Judy. It is not known what he did with it or why he left it in a prominent place in the bedroom. It became why Judy could not call from home for help. It was impossible because the killer had cut the phone line. He clearly wanted to deprive the victim of any chance to survive, and it worked. Doctors were sure that with timely assistance, she could have been saved. Despite the fact that the shot did not kill her immediately and she was able to leave the house, there was no one to help her. Unfortunately, she had to wait for Alan to arrive for some time, during which she lost a lot of blood. The detectives discovered traces of Alan, her husband. He continued to insist that he had nothing to do with the ambush. There were cigarette butts lying everywhere in the house, suggesting that the killer had smoked more than a pack of cigarettes while waiting for Judy. During the investigation, it turned out that neither the victim herself nor her husband smoked that brand of cigarettes, although this was not strong evidence of his innocence. This became the first piece of evidence in favor of Alan's alibi. It was strange that the criminal had entered the house without breaking in. Alan believed that all the windows and doors should have been closed before he left for work, but the shooter could have escaped through the window, which was wide open. During the searches, Alan remembered that his wife sometimes left the kitchen window slightly open to air out the house. This change in testimony was perceived as a very alarming sign. Spent cartridges were found at the scene of the crime. The first bullet hit a wooden wall. Flax was collected for further examination, and the police tried their best to find the weapon, but it was all in vain. Now, locating it had become a priority. It was believed that Alan managed to dispose of the gun, and naturally, he did not confess to this. Everything seemed to be against Alan. He was the first to report the incident and had spent the last minutes of Judy's life with her. His entire car was covered in blood, as were his hands and clothes. When Alan's office was searched, even more suspicious evidence was found. A special device for recording calls was installed on the family's home phone. Thanks to it, Alan could listen to their conversations while at work, checking his suspicions. This immediately drew the attention of the authorities to Alan. This became a reason to increase pressure on him. The most curious piece of evidence was a note found at the scene, which appeared to be a suicide note, but not written by Judy or her husband. A new name also surfaced in this case, Jonathan. On the other hand, Alan and Judy had serious problems, which offered more reasons to commit a crime. The recordings of telephone conversations were linked to his attempts to catch his wife in infidelity. He planned to use all of this to gain an advantage in court during their pending divorce. As it turned out, both were unfaithful in their marriage. Alan had already had 2 mistresses, which Judy knew about. These affairs significantly contributed to the collapse of their marriage. At the time of the attack, Judy also had a lover. They contacted him, but the man's name was not Jonathan, and he did not appear to look like a killer from the beginning. All suspicions were removed when he provided a reliable alibi. Just 2 days before her death, Judy had called and complained about problems in the marriage, mentioning that they were even sleeping in different rooms, that for over a month, nothing had kept them together except for their 5-year-old son, Jacob. Judy had long wanted to file for divorce but saw how well her child was with his father and did not want to ruin that bond. Alan truly played a significant role in Jacob's life. However, this no longer mattered against the backdrop of constant quarrels. Judy could no longer tolerate the conflicts and was planning to file for divorce. It is obvious that this gave Alan more reasons for anger. He could have been jealous of her, fearing that he would lose his son or be forced to share custody or pay alimony. Trudy confirmed that they indeed had disputes about their child, and both wanted to obtain custody rights, making the divorce process expectedly difficult. Trudy, too, had reason to confront Alan with accusations right in the medical center. However, the most compelling and disturbing arguments for the investigation came from Judy's friends. Everyone knew that Judy had serious marital problems, but the situation was worse than it seemed. Judy had repeatedly stated that if something happened to her, Alan would definitely be guilty. The possibility of financial motives for the crime also emerged. As their relationship began to crumble, Alan could solve all his problems at once and gain some benefit. This turned out to be true because a life insurance policy for Judy was found during the investigation, with her husband and son as the beneficiaries. Of course, Alan denied everything. He was interrogated for hours, but he insisted that under no circumstances would he kill the mother of his child. He claimed that he loved his son too much to deprive him of the most valuable person in his son's life. According to the investigation, there was not enough evidence to bring charges. More material evidence was needed. At a minimum, it was necessary to wait for the results of all the examinations. Contrary to the detective's expectations, doubts about the correctness of the choice of the main suspect arose with the first reports. The note found in the courtyard of the Southern house, identified as a suicide note, was signed by a certain Jonathan. However, the handwriting was not very legible, and the note itself was slightly contaminated with the blood of Judy. Complicating matters, it was clear that the note was addressed to a woman named Melanie and the letter was addressed to my wife, Melanie. At first, this confusion deepened because Melanie Southern did not exist, but there were other details in the letter, including an address that matched with Melanie Binney. This young woman lived at the location indicated in the note. She had a daughter and a husband named Jonathan Binney. The Binney family home was located approximately 5 kilometers from the ambush site where Judy was found. When the police checked Jonathan Binney in their database, it turned out that he fit the profile of the killer, as he had previously encountered problems with the law. Until recently, Jonathan had committed only minor offenses, but he was now under investigation for something far more serious. Shortly before Judy's death, he had abused his 3-month-old daughter. Initially, detectives believed that this note could have been written by Alan to mislead them and remove suspicion from himself. However, this clue needed proper analysis. In the suicide letter, Jonathan indicated that he wanted to leave this life voluntarily because he could not imagine being imprisoned for abusing a child. This all appeared suspicious when the detectives arrived at his house, where they found only his wife, Melanie. She admitted that he had not lived there since her statement about the child abuse case. Melanie was very angry with Jonathan. When she found out what happened to the Southern family, she was shocked because, in her opinion, Jonathan did not look like a killer, although she was no longer sure of anything. She was amazed at how close she had let a true madman, capable of such atrocities, into her life. She told the police where Jonathan could be, and the detectives arrived at the specified address, but even there, the suspect could not be found. Investigators contacted his close friends, but they also did not know where he could be. In the media, an alert was issued that a dangerous criminal was on the run, and they believed he could not have gone far. Additionally, considering the suicide note, they expected to find his lifeless body sooner. Tracking him down, the police used K-9 units with specially trained dogs and aerial support from police helicopters. The search took nearly a day until finally the dogs led the police to the basement of a house. There, Jonathan was found lying on the floor, shirtless, with 6 nicotine patches stuck to his chest. He was alive. The man told the police that he had attempted to take his own life by overdosing on nicotine. This was probably meant to convince everyone that he felt remorseful. Jonathan did not resist when he was arrested. He even seemed a little glad that it was all finally over. At the time of the crime, Jonathan Binney was 26 years old. His behavior raised doubts about his mental stability. Some suspected he might have mental issues. However, a psychiatric examination indicated that he was aware of his actions both during and after the crime. This led investigators to suspect that he was merely trying to elicit sympathy with his threats. Melanie provided detectives with writing samples that were analyzed by a handwriting expert. The expert found several significant characteristics that distinguished Jonathan's handwriting. He noted the similarity in the spelling of the lowercase g and f in the suicide note and in the samples. According to the analysis, there was almost a 100% probability that this letter was written by Jonathan himself. After this conclusion, the case against Alan began to collapse. Prior to Jonathan's arrest, the police had offered Alan a polygraph test. He agreed and passed with flying colors, which should have strengthened their confidence in his innocence, but they did not want to let him go. Alan was kept under suspicion until Jonathan confessed to attacking Judy, making it clear that Alan had no involvement in the crime. Alan was subsequently released. Another key piece of evidence was the DNA found on the toy in the house. The expert used dozens of filters to collect particles of saliva and skin from the killer, which also matched Jonathan's profile. This linked him to the crime scene. The day before Jonathan was arrested, the police found a 9mm handgun, a significant discovery. Despite a thorough search, they did not find this 9mm handgun registered to Alan. The gun was later confiscated and examined, but ballistics tests showed that it was not the weapon used to kill Judy. However, a dog team found another gun of the appropriate caliber in the woods near the house. Ballistics experts were now able to compare the bullets, cartridges, and guns. Tests were conducted. The markings on the bullets were then compared to objects from the scene of the massacre. The tests allowed investigators to prove that Judy was shot with this pistol. Fingerprints were found on the handle of the pistol, which also led to the arrest of a child abuser, Jonathan. During the search of Jonathan's house, police managed to find 9mm Cobra cartridges for a concealed carry pistol on the body under his clothing, as well as other evidence. All this confirmed that Jonathan was the weapon's owner. Melanie also told the police that he always carried a weapon with him, which he bought for self-defense. However, this had little effect on the situation with Alan. Even after that, he still looked suspicious. There were too many doubts against him because of the existing motive. Therefore, his status changed. It was now believed that he did not kill his wife with his own hands but became the mastermind behind the murder, using Jonathan as the executor. However, he refused to admit he didn't even know Jonathan. The theory that Alan hired Jonathan to kill his wife was also carefully investigated for a long time. The correspondence and calls were analyzed, but no connection leading Judy to Jonathan could be found. It seemed they were not acquainted at all. Against this backdrop, authorities tried to find at least some connection between the criminal and his victim in order to understand the motive for the attack. For a long time, it was thought this would help uncover Alan's involvement in the crime. It seemed suspicious that Judy called out a similar name before her death. Perhaps she really knew him or was trying to say something else, but her husband did not hear. The closest tie the police found was the period when Jonathan worked as a security guard at the library, where Judy occasionally borrowed books. They both had membership cards for the institution and exchanged pleasantries with each other. However, when questioned, the employees of the library could not remember any incidents involving Jonathan. The staff described Jonathan as a somewhat strange young man. While he worked as a security guard, he had no problems in his service record, at least none were known at his workplace. In fact, during this period, Jonathan had only minor offenses. When they questioned him about his job at the library, he could not recall anything that might connect him to Judy. Eventually, the detectives were forced to admit that this murder was a spontaneous act of aggression against an unknown person and a coincidence with Alan. All suspicions against Alan were dismissed. Jonathan was not familiar with Judy Southern. The choice of victim was random. He was merely driving around the city on his moped, looking for a suitable house to ambush. The southern house seemed ideal to him, primarily because he spotted an open window that allowed for easy entry. Once inside the house, Jonathan clearly envisioned his actions. He had no specific target and was prepared to shoot whomever entered first, aiming to harm an innocent person. He smoked to ease his nerves. When it became he'd have to wait, he played video games and rummaged through the rooms. He never commented on Judy's abandoned adult toy. When Jonathan discovered that Judy had a husband and a 5-year-old son at the time, he claimed he would have shot any of them without discrimination or hesitation, even a child, if they had entered the house. Jonathan also confessed to abusing a 3-month-old child. Due to the ongoing investigation, he later told the authorities that he did not want to go to jail for child abuse, especially considering the familial ties and age of the victim. He was aware of how badly prisoners with such convictions were treated and described in detail the suffering caused by his fear of incarceration. Therefore, he sought a way to remedy the situation. Jonathan decided to go to jail as a murderer. He likely did not realize that he would be tried for both crimes and face 2 sentences, making it impossible to entirely hide his dark past. While in the ambush house, Jonathan altered his plan and decided to take his own life after committing the murder, so he didn't particularly care about leaving evidence. With these thoughts, he even wrote a suicide note. He spent several days behind bars and eventually told the police, without waiting for his lawyer, that he wanted to officially plead guilty to Judy's murder. Jonathan was not planning to deny his guilt regarding the abuse of a 3-month-old. His conscience was eating away at him, and he was ready to talk to detectives again. The entire local community was shocked by what had happened, especially Melanie, who had already suffered greatly. The media eagerly reported that a 3-month-old baby had been abused by her own father. Authorities feared public unrest and felt compelled to provide increased protection for the criminal. When Melanie learned that her husband was willing to kill any person, even a child, to avoid jail time for his shameful crime, she desperately wanted him imprisoned forever, or better yet, sentenced to death, so that this bloody chaos would end as soon as possible. Given the evidence collected, even without a confession, Jonathan Binney faced little chance of receiving a lenient sentence. He was found guilty of murdering Judy Southern and abusing a baby, receiving the highest punishment before being placed on death row. The court's decision elicited strong reactions from both the killer's wife and the family of the deceased, who finally breathed a sigh of relief and continued to raise their children. Jonathan's lawyer fought for a temporary reprieve, even managing to secure one at first, and subsequently signed a written agreement with the authorities stating that he would never again appeal the sentence if the death penalty were commuted to life imprisonment without the chance of parole. This agreement worked. Jonathan Binney is now serving a life sentence and remains behind bars. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Marina Diaz-Vallecillos. Marina Diaz-Vallecillos was born on December 24, 2002, in Granada, Andalusia, Spain. She grew up in Granada with her mother, Teresa Vallecillos, and her 4 sisters, Alba, Andrea, Lucia, and Alejandra. Marina was a sociable girl who enjoyed spending time with her friends. Her sister, Andrea, shared that, after finishing high school, she started working at a pharmacy, although it is unclear how she got the job. Her life took a significant turn at the age of 16. At that time, she met a woman named Yasmina, who was born in the late 1980s and was nearly twice her age. However, Marina's family has been strongly opposed to the relationship from the beginning. Since Marina and Yasmina started dating in 2019, the family has been concerned, and her mother has always lived in a state of insecurity. Teresa reported Yasmina to the police several times, fearing for her daughter's safety. Marina was a gentle, sweet, and calm person, which made her family worry that she might be vulnerable to Yasmina's manipulation. It is unclear whether the police took any action regarding these reports, but it is certain that Marina and Yasmina's relationship persisted, with Yasmina displaying increasingly aggressive behavior. Marina confided all the details of her relationship to her mother and sisters, leaving them deeply worried, as Yasmina was extremely cruel. Yasmina repeatedly cut Marina's hair without any reason and used psychological violence by threatening her and attempting to kick her out of the house. Despite this, Yasmina did not want to end the relationship. Yasmina told Marina that if they ever broke up, she would burn down her house and harm all of Marina's relatives. Such a volatile situation was bound to have dire consequences. According to Marina's cousin, Shumar, the reason Marina never reported Yasmina's abusive behavior was her fear of Yasmina's reaction and potential retaliation. What mattered most to Marina was ensuring the safety of her family and avoiding putting them in danger. Over time, as Yasmina and Marina began living together, the violence escalated, resulting in severe social isolation. By early 2021, after being together for roughly a year and a half, they relocated to an undisclosed location, choosing not to share the address with Marina's family. Teresa, the mother of Marina, shared that they felt powerless because they were unable to locate their daughter or provide support. Conflicting information from acquaintances only complicates the situation further, leaving Teresa uncertain about whether they live in a house or an apartment, or even about the exact area of the city where they are located. Teresa lived in constant fear, unable to contact her daughter and worried something terrible might happen. Tragically, on April 13, 2021, her worst fears came true. At around 3 p.m., Yasmina appeared at the police station in Motril, a city on the Mediterranean coast in Granada, and confessed to the crime. Yasmina told the police that the prior day, while she and Marina were at their rented home, a heated argument broke out between them after breakfast. According to Yasmina, Marina eventually took a knife and threatened her, stating that she could no longer endure their relationship after a year and a half of suffering from both mental and physical abuse. Yasmina claimed she believed Marina would attack her with the knife, prompting her to seize the weapon and strike first. Yasmina explained that Marina had begun screaming and calling for help from the landlord, who happened to be their neighbor. However, before anyone could intervene or understand what was happening, Yasmina threw Marina to the floor and continued stabbing her. After realizing that Marina had died, Yasmina decided not to seek help. Instead, she attempted to cover up the crime by wrapping Marina's body in a sheet, taking a shower, and thoroughly cleaning the entire apartment with cleaning products to erase any evidence. Yasmina disposed of the knife by throwing it into a garbage container along the road leading to the village of Gorgarca, located in the municipality of Veles de Benadal. Around 5 p.m., Yasmina went to the port of Motril to meet her friend Antonio Manuel, to whom she confessed the murder. She asked for his assistance in finding a place to bury Marina's body. Consequently, Antonio was accused of being an accessory to the crime due to his involvement in the incident following the murder. Initially, Yasmina insisted that she had sought his help. Later, when Antonio was arrested, Yasmina changed her statement, claiming she had only sought emotional support from him during a difficult time. Following Yasmina's confession, the authorities went to the apartment she shared with Marina, where the crime had taken place. Inside, they found Marina's body wrapped in a blanket. Investigators confirmed Yasmina's account, noting that the apartment had been meticulously cleaned, leaving behind no visible evidence of the crime, apart from a strong smell of cleaning products. Due to challenges in collecting evidence, assistance was requested from a specialized unit of the National Police in Motril, experts in detecting altered crime scene traces. This team arrived in Granada on April 14, 2021, shortly after Marina's remains were transported to the city's Anatomical Institute, where all necessary tests were conducted. The results revealed that Marina had died from 24 stab wounds inflicted by Yasmina using a sharp object. It was also determined that Marina, aged 18, had suffered over 20 blows and other injuries to various parts of her body. On April 16, 4 days after the crime, the Court of First Instance No. 3 in Motril ordered Yasmina to be held in pretrial custody without bail. Despite her lack of prior criminal record, the Supreme Court of Andalusia stated that this decision aimed to protect the investigation and prevent her from fleeing. On the same day, the court decided to temporarily release Antonio Manuel, initially suspected of helping conceal the crime, as a precautionary measure. Because no formal request for his arrest had been made, he was required to report to the authorities every Tuesday, and his passport was confiscated. On the same day, the government of Grenada announced that the case would be treated as an instance of domestic violence since Yasmina and Marina had been living together. Although the authorities acted swiftly, the trial did not commence until December 13, 2022. Friends and family of Marina gathered outside the court, shouting and demanding justice for the young woman who had tragically lost her life shortly after she had turned 18. During the trial, Marina's family lawyer, Jesus Huertos, highlighted the brutal nature of Yasmina's actions, detailing the extensive injuries Marina had suffered. He said that Yasmina deserved a life sentence but should still be given the opportunity to rehabilitate. Additionally, Marina's psychologist, who also counseled her mother, Teresa, testified in court. The psychologist revealed that Marina had repeatedly expressed her fear of Yasmina's violent behavior and had stated that she no longer wanted to continue the relationship. Other witnesses provided statements backing this narrative. The prosecution argued that Yasmina had intentionally prolonged Marina's suffering before carrying out the killing, emphasizing the cruelty of the act. However, unlike the family's lawyer, the prosecution did not seek a life sentence. Instead, they recommended a 17-year prison term. The defense attorney representing Yasmina argued that she had been in poor physical and mental condition at the time of the crime. On that day, she had allegedly taken antidepressants while also consuming illegal substances, which impaired her perception of reality. According to the lawyer, Yasmina reacted violently when Marina expressed her desire to leave the house and approached her with a knife. The lawyer asserted that Yasmina was unable to fully comprehend her actions and requested her acquittal during the initial hearing. During the trial, Yasmina expressed remorse, acknowledging the difficulty she had in understanding her actions, while admitting her awareness of the gravity of the crime. She revealed that her decision to surrender to the authorities stemmed from her realization that Marina did not deserve to be buried in an unmarked, improvised grave. Yasmina explained that her intent was not only to ensure Marina received a proper burial but also to take responsibility for her actions. However, she insisted that she never intended to harm her partner, claiming her actions were meant to protect Marina instead. These statements conflicted with testimony from Marina's relatives as well as Yasmina's initial statements. In early March 2023, a provisional court in Grenada sentenced Yasmina to 17 years in prison for murder, taking into account mitigating factors such as her relationship with Marina and her voluntary confession. After serving her prison term, she will be subjected to conditional release for 5 years. Additionally, Yasmina must fulfill financial and personal obligations, including paying €75,000 in compensation to Marina's mother and €22,000 to Marina's sisters, Alba, Andrea Lucia, and Alejandra. She is also prohibited from contacting them for 22 years. Regarding Antonio Manuel, who was initially accused of helping to conceal the crime, the prosecutor's office recommended a prison sentence of 15 months. However, due to his cognitive disability, judicial authorities ultimately dropped all charges against him. Marina's family announced plans to appeal the decision, arguing that the punishment was insufficient given the severity of the crime. In public statements, they criticized the lack of support from Spanish legal institutions, particularly since the case was not fully classified as domestic violence. They expressed deep concern about the authorities' stance on this issue, which they deemed highly significant. In their appeal efforts, the prosecution aimed not only to increase Yasmina's sentence but also to establish a precedent for similar cases. Meanwhile, Yasmina's defense announced plans to file an appeal, seeking either a reduction in the charges or a complete reversal of the verdict. In July 2023, the Supreme Court of Andalusia rejected both appeals, upholding the original sentence of 17 years in prison along with the restrictions imposed on Yasmina. The court confirmed that the sentence was appropriate and justified based on the evidence presented during the trial. In press interviews, Teresa, Marina's mother, shared the hardships she and her 4 daughters faced following Marina's tragic death. She also expressed frustration over the authorities' failure to implement adequate protective measures, despite the numerous complaints she had personally filed. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Thomas Kwan. On January 22, 2024, Patrick O'Hara, 70, presented to the emergency department at the Royal Victoria Infirmary in Newcastle upon Tyne with severe pain in his upper arm, particularly at the site of the vaccine injection he had received a few hours earlier. Initially, the medical staff suspected that his pain was a result of a poor injection. They provided him with antibiotics and painkillers, advised him to monitor his arm closely. However, Patrick's situation worsened. Within hours, his arm developed blisters and changed color. The following day, he returned to the hospital, where doctors were confused by the rapid decline in his condition. Blood tests were performed but did not reveal any significant issues. Eventually, it became evident that Patrick was experiencing a necrotizing infection that was damaging his tissue, particularly around the injection site. It was likely that he had not received a vaccine but rather a toxin that led to these serious complications. To contain the infection and save Patrick's life, he required surgery to remove the infected tissue. Meanwhile, specialists were working to identify the substance that had caused his condition, as knowing the specific poison involved could help doctors formulate a more effective treatment plan. Dr. Emmett, an expert in the field, suggested that iodomethane could be responsible for Patrick's condition. Iodomethane is highly toxic, and exposure can cause burns and blisters similar to those Patrick was experiencing. There had been no prior instances of methane injections in humans, making its use particularly risky, and the substance is almost impossible to detect in the body. At around 10 a.m. on the morning of January 22, while Patrick was feeling ill, a male nurse named Raj Patel from the National Health Service arrived at his home. Nurse Raj Patel was assigned to examine Patrick and arrived at his and his partner Jenny's residence. He spoke with an Asian accent and in broken English, appearing slightly awkward but competent. The visit lasted about 4 minutes, during which he collected blood and urine samples from Patrick. Jenny, Patrick's partner, came downstairs during the check and asked to have her blood pressure taken, to which Raj agreed. After that, Patrick started preparing to administer a booster vaccine. Even though he mentioned that he had already received this vaccine less than 3 months earlier, Raj insisted that he needed another dose. When Raj administered the injection, Patrick experienced sharp and intense pain. Raj assured him that this was a normal reaction and that the pain would soon subside. However, after giving the injection, Raj quickly gathered his equipment and left the house, which Patrick found suspicious. At the hospital, where Patrick was placed in intensive care, the doctors noticed several letters that he and Jenny had received recently. They informed Jenny that there was no local nursing staff and that the National Health Service had no nurse named Raj Patel. This letter turned out to be a forgery, and the health worker was a fraud. The forgery was well crafted. It featured the National Health Service logo at the top, included hyperlinks, and used medical language along with personal privacy notes typical of unofficial reports. Another letter, sent earlier that month, followed a similar format. It included a QR code that directed Patrick to a short health questionnaire and suggested a home visit on January 22 between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. The day before this, Patrick received a reminder text message from an unknown number, claiming to be from a health worker named Patel. However, Patrick only became suspicious when Nurse Raj began to act nervously during the injection. One particular action raised alarms. As Raj was leaving, Jenny came down the stairs and told him he was as tall as her son. This startled Patrick, and she chased after him, but he disappeared. Northumbria police then began tracking him from his home in Newcastle city centre. CCTV footage showed him driving to a hotel and checking in. Raj arrived in a car with fake number plates. He checked into the hotel using a false name. 2 hours later, he left his room wearing a long coat, a flat cap, blue surgical gloves, and a medical mask. He walked through the hotel lobby and exited the building. It was less than a 10-minute walk from the hotel to Patrick and Jenny's home on St. Thomas's Street. In the UK, number plates are specific to the make and model of the vehicle they are assigned to. The number plates on Raj's vehicle were easily identifiable as counterfeit. They matched the car's make but not its model. Investigators traced the car back to the hotel that morning and then to its original location, which led them to the small town of Ingleby Barwick, south of Newcastle in Stockton. The car had left the home of Thomas Kwan, son of Jenny Leung. Jenny has several sons from her first marriage, but she noticed a resemblance between her eldest son, Thomas Kwan, 50, and Raj Patel. Thomas was born in Hong Kong and moved to the UK 39 years ago at the age of 13. His parents sent him to an English boarding school, and he later studied medicine at Newcastle University. He is now a general practitioner and a partner at Happy House Clinic in Sunderland, about a half-hour's drive from his mother's home. Thomas had a troubled relationship with his mother, likely stemming from their parents' divorce that occurred 27 years ago. Many of Thomas's issues with her revolved around money. He believed that before their separation, his mother, Jenny, had taken £1 million from their joint account and pressured his father into the divorce. Years later, when his father passed away, Thomas was upset to find that he received a smaller portion of the inheritance compared to his younger brother. In a letter to his mother, Thomas expressed his feelings, accusing her of being unfair and of stealing money from his father. He asked her to clarify the changes in the will and accused her of betrayal. Patrick, trying to ease the tension, asked Thomas to leave the house and confronted him emotionally. Jenny's actions further complicated the family dynamics. The police were called to the scene, but Thomas left before they arrived. This incident deeply affected the relationship between him and his mother, Jenny. Since then, Thomas has had little contact with her and has not visited. When authorities began investigating the case of the fake nurse, they discovered that Thomas's name appeared in their review of the nurse's route. CCTV footage showed the car traveling from Newcastle to Ingleby Barwick, heading directly to Thomas's house. This connection raised suspicions among investigators, who found it odd that a vehicle linked to the crime was seen near Thomas's residence. They quickly sought more information about him. It was revealed that there had been a conflict over a will, which could have provided a motive for his involvement. Investigators also discovered that Thomas had previously purchased chemicals, including toxic substances, which could have been used to create the agent that made Patrick sick. These online purchases became a significant focus of the investigation. The police then searched Thomas's home and found packages of chemical reagents and equipment in his garage that resembled a laboratory. They also discovered medical supplies, including syringes, gloves, and protective masks. On Thomas's computer, investigators found searches relating to toxic substances and how to use them. Additionally, there were fake National Health Service forms that matched those sent to Patrick and Jenny. Further investigation revealed that Thomas had planned the crime well in advance, using his medical expertise and available resources. He fabricated an elaborate story to pose as a fake nurse, knowing exactly how to speak, present himself, and what documents to provide. However, his rushed escape after administering the injection, along with other blunders, ultimately worked against him. The police arrested Thomas on February 15, 2024. At the time of his arrest, he denied any involvement in Patrick's poisoning, but the evidence against him grew increasingly compelling. The case was classified as attempted murder, and preparations were made for it to go to court. Thomas leveraged his medical reputation and knowledge to create a false appearance of professionalism. He orchestrated the entire scheme to avoid detection until it was too late. During a search of his home, police discovered not only chemicals and instructions but also complete production equipment, including measuring instruments, protective suits, and laboratory containers. The investigation revealed that Thomas had been planning his crime for an extended period, gathering resources and researching their characteristics. His mobile phone contained clear evidence of his intentions, showing multiple internet searches for poisons. He specifically looked for information on how to use ricin to carry out a slow and painful murder. His searches included terms like ricin dosage, duration of the toxin, and cyanide effects on the human body, indicating that he aimed to proceed carefully and minimize errors. Despite his planning, Thomas made several mistakes that led to the investigation uncovering his scheme. For example, he used a fake license plate on his car, but the police quickly noticed that the plates didn't match the car model. Additionally, his disguise as a nurse was inadequate. Jenny's comment that he resembled her son raised initial suspicions. His quick departure from home after administering the injection and his suspicious behavior further contributed to the doubts about him. Books on toxicology and instructions for creating poisons found in Thomas's possession strengthened the case against him. Additionally, a copy of the National Center of Excellence for Police Investigation Manual on Murder was discovered on his computer. This manual could provide a criminal with insights on how to avoid detection. The evidence suggested that Thomas planned to commit the murder with great precision while minimizing the risk of being caught. What was particularly alarming was how he manipulated his family. The letters, text messages, and Thomas's fabricated identity as a nurse indicated that he was orchestrating a large-scale scheme. It was shocking to think that a doctor, someone who was supposed to save lives, was involved in such a heinous crime. When arrested, Thomas denied all accusations. However, the evidence gathered, including chemicals, laboratory equipment, books, and digital records, painted an undeniable picture of his guilt. The investigation revealed that he acted with cold calculation, leveraging his expertise and resources to commit a deliberate poisoning with the intent to kill. He refused to admit guilt regarding attempted murder, but the evidence, including his internet searches, was compelling. The police also found that Thomas had been spying on his mother and her partner, Patrick. He had installed spyware on a laptop they gave him, which allowed him to monitor their daily activities, read emails, and track financial transactions in real time, taking screenshots and saving correspondence to support his suspicions of misuse of the family's money. What was especially shocking was that Thomas devised multiple plans for the murder before finally deciding to impersonate a nurse. One of his ideas involved sending poisoned drinks or food while pretending to be part of a made-up group called the Northern Wine Tasting Club, offering free samples. These plans revealed just how far he was willing to go to achieve his goal. When Thomas created the nurse persona, Raj Patel, he made a fake ID with his own picture, used a wig, and glued on a beard. He not only had a detailed cover story but also props to support his disguise in case anyone questioned him. During the 40 minutes he spent in the house, he managed to deceive even his own mother by acting like a caring healthcare worker. This revelation stunned those who knew Thomas. Patients were shocked to find out that their doctor was involved in such a crime. Many expressed that the trust typically inspired by a man in a doctor's uniform was ruthlessly exploited. Residents in the neighborhood watched in horror as the investigation disrupted their quiet suburb. While Patrick was in intensive care, doctors worked hard to save his life. He underwent several surgeries to remove dead tissue and stop the infection from spreading further. Additionally, he needed plastic surgery to repair the damage to his arm. Fortunately, Patrick survived, but he faces a long road to full recovery. Thomas Kwan was arrested but refused to cooperate with the medical team trying to determine what substance was injected into Patrick. By staying silent, he raised suspicions that he deliberately aimed to cause serious harm. The investigation indicated that he probably used iodine. During the proceedings, Thomas asserted that he did not intend to kill anyone, he merely sought to inflict mild pain or discomfort. However, when his trial commenced in Newcastle in October 2024, this assertion quickly fell apart in light of the evidence presented. Prosecutor Peter Makepeace, in his opening statement, reminded the jury that sometimes reality can be stranger than fiction. He pointed out that Thomas's careful and detailed planning suggested that his intentions were far more serious than he claimed. Thomas's knowledge of poisons, his extensive research, and his experience made it clear that he fully understood the life-threatening nature of his actions. Moreover, Thomas's motivation went beyond mere financial gain. Even though the inheritance he received after dividing property with his relatives was relatively small, his feelings of grievance ran deeper. He accused his mother of not loving him enough during his childhood and framed the attack on Patrick, her partner, as a means to emotionally hurt her in revenge. On the second day of the trial, October 7, 2024, Thomas pleaded guilty, which spared the court from weeks of hearings. The victim, Patrick O'Hara, shared how the attack affected his life. Thomas received a severe sentence that reflected both the seriousness of his crime and the level of planning involved. The judge noted that while some aspects of Thomas's plan were poorly executed, such as using fake license plates that didn't match the car model, he had put a significant amount of effort into preparing for the crime. This level of planning justified a lengthy sentence. Thomas Kwan was sentenced to 31 years and 5 months in prison. His guilty plea and clean record prior to the incident were taken into consideration during sentencing. Patrick O'Hara faced challenges in his recovery, suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, which ultimately led to the end of his long-term relationship with Jenny. Despite these difficulties, Patrick expressed his appreciation for the professionals at the National Health Service who saved his life. After the trial, he gradually returned to a normal routine, though he continued to experience physical and emotional reminders of the attack. Nonetheless, this incident became a catalyst for new beginnings for him. After parting ways with Jenny, he relocated from Newcastle to a quiet coastal town where he found peace. While there, Patrick focused on helping victims of violence and fraud. He began speaking at conferences and in the media to share his story and emphasize the importance of remaining vigilant, even in everyday situations. Meanwhile, Jenny, overwhelmed by her son's actions and her guilt toward Patrick, worked on improving her family relationships. She stepped back from public life to concentrate on her family, but her bond with Thomas was never repaired. In prison, Thomas Kwan began to understand the seriousness of his actions. In isolation, he had to confront his motives and the harm he had caused to his family. However, prison records indicated that he still had a long way to go before he felt true remorse. At the beginning of his sentence, he continued to rationalize his actions, feeling a sense of injustice. Patrick, who had endured many hardships, found happiness in simple pleasures, like walks by the sea and friendships with those who valued him for who he was. He often expressed that his greatest achievement was learning to trust again. Although the scars on his hand never disappeared, he came to see them not as reminders of pain, but as symbols of the strength he discovered to keep moving forward, even in the toughest times. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of the DeFeo family. To truly understand it all, let's first get to know the DeFeo family, who once lived in a house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, Long Island, New York. Ronald Joseph DeFeo Sr., more commonly known as Big Ronnie, was born on November 16, 1930, to parents Rocco and Antoinette DeFeo. When he was younger, Big Ronnie was slender, handsome, and had a powerful gaze reminiscent of the legendary Rudolph Valentino. With his suave looks, he attracted the attention of Louise Marie DeFeo, who was born on November 3, 1931, to Michael John Briganti Jr. and Angelina Maria Briganti. Louise had aspirations of becoming a model. She was beautiful enough to mingle with the best, including the famous singer Mel Torme. After a brief courtship, Big Ronnie and Louise married. However, the Briganti family disapproved of Big Ronnie, cutting all ties with the newlyweds until September 26, 1951, when their son Ronald DeFeo Jr. was born. He would later be known as Butch. Growing up, Butch faced many struggles as the firstborn son. His father expected a lot from him, and Big Ronnie was not afraid to discipline Butch in harsh ways. One minute he would hug his son, and the next he would throw him across the room. Louise's brother, Michael John Briganti Jr., would later testify at the DeFeo trial about an incident he witnessed when Butch was only 2 years old. He recalled, "They were all sitting down in the basement watching TV, and he don't know what the boy had done, but all of a sudden, the father just pushed the boy into the wall. The boy banged his head or part of his shoulder or something." As a child, Butch was extremely overweight, a problem that would persist until his late teenage years when he began using amphetamines. His school life suffered as a result, with bigger kids often teasing him and calling him names like the Blob, Bucky Beaver, and Pork Chop. On July 29, 1956, Louise gave birth to a daughter, Dawn Teresa DeFeo. A few years later, on August 16, 1961, Louise gave birth to Allison Louise, and then again on September 4, 1962, to Mark Gregory. Sometime after Mark's birth, Louise decided to leave her husband for reasons that remain unclear. To win her back, Big Ronnie determination to express his love. On October 24, 1965, Big Ronnie was blessed with a third son, John Matthew. By this time, the family had moved from their Brooklyn apartment to a lavish home on the south shore of Long Island in the affluent community of Amityville. Many wondered how Big Ronnie, working as a car dealer service manager, could afford such a luxurious home. The answer was clear: his father-in-law, Michael John Briganti Sr. In the early 1970s, Big Ronnie decided he wanted life-sized portraits to immortalize his family. Michael Jr. picked up the tab, which was estimated to be at least $50,000. The painstakingly detailed portraits took over a year to complete, and when finished, they hung in large golden frames on the staircase wall between the first and second floors of the DeFeo home. By this point, Butch had become increasingly troublesome as he got older. The DeFeos owned an auto body shop where Butch worked, but he spent more time at bars than actually working. His growing addiction to banned substance and alcohol only made things worse, driving him to violence against his own family. There was even an incident where he pulled a gun on his father, and countless other times he lashed out physically at those closest to him. Then, in the early hours of November 13, 1974, Butch completely snapped. Armed with a rifle, he moved silently through the house, murdering his family members one by one as they slept. What's truly chilling about this is that, despite the brutal killings taking place within just 15 minutes, the bodies showed no signs of struggle. Even more bizarre, the sound of gunshots didn't wake any of the other family members, or at least didn't rouse them from their beds. The bodies were found all face down on their beds, almost as if they had been carefully placed that way. To add to the eerie nature of the crime, the rifle had no silencer, yet aside from the family dog barking, none of the neighbors reported hearing a single gunshot that night. After committing the horrific murders, Butch calmly took a bath, got dressed for work, and then reported the crime, claiming he discovered the gruesome scene after returning home. He even suggested that a mafia hitman, Louis Fellini, along with two accomplices, was responsible. However, a police interview soon revealed serious inconsistencies in his story. The next day, Butch admitted to carrying out the murders himself. Fellini, the supposed hitman, had an airtight alibi, proving he was out of state at the time of the killings. DeFeo confessed, saying, once he started, he just couldn't stop. It went so fast. He went on to explain how he took a bath, changed his clothes, and carefully disposed of key evidence, including his blood-stained clothes, the Marlin rifle, and cartridges, before going to work as if nothing had happened. It was claimed that Butch had been hearing voices that urged him to commit the murders. However, the prosecution brought in a psychiatrist. According to the psychiatrist, Butch wasn't hearing voices or possessed by another personality. He simply didn't see anything wrong with killing his family. Because of that, DeFeo was convicted on 6 counts of murder and sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms, which he continued to serve at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in New York until he died on March 12, 2021. Just over a year after the tragic deaths of the DeFeo family, the home on Ocean Boulevard was sold to the Lutz family, who would soon unknowingly step into a new chapter of horror. The Amityville home, marked by its horrific past, raises the question of whether the tragic events left behind some lingering eerie energy haunting the land where it all unfolded. However, the Lutz family wouldn't have to wonder for long. They would soon share their own unsettling experiences in the home. Although the price was a bit higher than their budget of $30,000 to $50,000, something about the house pulled them in. It was a beautiful colonial-style home with 6 bedrooms, a heated pool, and a boathouse sitting right on the Amityville River. Don't think for a second that the Lutz family wasn't aware of the horrific murders that had taken place there. In fact, they knew all about the house's dark past. But despite that, the Lutzes fell in love with the property and decided it was meant to be theirs. They bought the house for a bargain price of $80,000, never once thinking it was unlivable because of its tragic history. However, what was supposed to be their dream home soon turned into a waking nightmare. The strange and terrifying events that followed were later shared with the world by author Jay Anson in his famous book, The Amityville Horror. Before moving into the house, George Lutz was a successful businessman, but after settling in new house, something changed. He became sluggish, cold, and irritable. Most bizarre of all, he started waking up at 3:15 in the morning every night, unable to get back to sleep. It wasn't just random, it was the exact time the DeFeo murders had occurred. One night, George was startled to see his 5-year-old daughter, Missy, standing by her bedroom window. But what sent chills down his spine was the eerie outline of a pig's face with glowing red eyes staring at him from behind her. He rushed into her room, only to find Missy sound asleep, as if nothing had happened. Not long after, Missy talked about a new friend, an imaginary pig named Jody. But was Jody really imaginary? In another bone-chilling moment, George looked at his wife Kathy as she lay sleeping, but something was horribly wrong. Her face had distorted and aged, as if she'd become a 90-year-old woman overnight. At times, Kathy seemed to undergo strange transformations, aging rapidly and looking like someone else entirely. Her mother even witnessed this unnatural change firsthand. But the strange events didn't stop there. The house seemed to have a mind of its own. Doors were ripped off their hinges, and in the middle of a freezing winter, a room was suddenly filled with flies. Outside, cloven hoofprints appeared in the snow, right near their doorstep. Inside, green slime started to ooze down the walls, and then in the basement, they discovered a hidden room that didn't appear on any of the house's original blueprints. The room was painted a deep, unsettling red and was only large enough for two people to sit close together. But what was even more disturbing was the faint rancid odor that lingered in the room, adding to the overwhelming sense of dread that hung in the air. George even tried bringing their family dog into the mysterious basement room, but the animal refused to step inside. The usually dog backed away, tail tucked, and whimpered in fear. It was the first time George had ever seen the dog so terrified, as if it sensed something lurking in the shadows, something invisible to human eyes but deeply unsettling to an animal's instincts. The eerie experiences didn't stop there. One night, George was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of a band playing downstairs. The lively music echoed through the house as if an invisible group was holding a late-night gathering. Confused and unnerved, he made his way to the living room to investigate, but the moment he stepped inside, everything went silent. No music, no people, nothing. Yet something had definitely been there. The rug had been rolled up, and the furniture had been shifted, as if a dance floor had been cleared for a ghostly celebration. Desperate for help, the Lutz family reached out to a priest, hoping for some kind of blessing or relief from the terrifying events. However, the moment the priest stepped into the house, things took a dark turn. He was overwhelmed by a sudden intense sickness and began to experience his own set of unexplained disturbances. Some force seemed to be warning him to stay away. The impact of these events reached far beyond the Lutz family. Author Jay Anson recalled how meeting the priest convinced him that this was more than just a story, it was real. From there, he started to create the book. On January 14, 1976, after just 28 days of living in what they thought would be their dream home, the Lutz family experienced a night so terrifying that they made a split-second decision. They packed a few bags, left everything else behind, and fled, never to return. According to a 2005 interview with George Lutz, he emphasized that their departure wasn't planned. They didn't wake up that morning thinking they were leaving for good. This was their home. When they left, they didn't know they wouldn't be coming back. They didn't know that everything they left behind they would never see again. Their abandoned belongings, untouched and frozen in time, were later set to be auctioned off. The house that had once seemed like a fresh start had turned into something they could never return to. Determined to share their horrifying experience, the Lutz family recounted every chilling detail to writer Anson, he would go on to transform their story into the instant bestseller in 1977. The book gripped the public, with the Los Angeles Times calling it both fascinating and frightening. Some critics believed its success wasn't just about ghosts and haunted houses. They argued that the story resonated with people because of the unstable political and economic climate in the United States at the time. Rampant inflation, rising interest rates, a crippling oil shortage had left the country anxious and uneasy. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that the horrors inside the Amityville house weren't the only ones haunting the Lutz family. Their business was struggling due to the failing economy, and at the worst possible time, the IRS launched an investigation into their taxes. For many readers in the late 70s, this felt all too real, paranormal or not. Financial stress and uncertainty were things they knew all too well. By blending supernatural terror with real, life struggles, the Amityville horror struck a nerve with the American public. It wasn't just a ghost story, it was a reflection of the fears people were living with every day. Some critics even argued that the book cleverly capitalized on popular horror trends of the time, the trope of a once-loving father turning violent and unrecognizable. When asked if he had experienced anything strange while writing the book, Anson quickly dismissed the idea, replying, "No, however, he did suffer a heart attack soon after finishing it, though he insisted it was due to his smoking and unhealthy lifestyle rather than anything paranormal." But while Anson shrugged off any supernatural connection, eerie incidents followed those who got too close to the story. Several people who handled early copies of the manuscript reportedly had near-fatal encounters. One of Anson's friends had a fire break out in his car while driving the manuscript back to the publisher. Another friend and his son nearly drowned when their car plunged into the water, but when rescuers opened the trunk, the manuscript inside was mysteriously dry, despite being stored in a simple clasped envelope. In the most chilling case, a woman who had been given the first 2 chapters to read died in a house fire the very night she received them, and among the charred remains of her home, the pages of the manuscript were found completely untouched. The terrifying tale of the Lutz family has since been adapted into several films, with the most famous being the 1979 version starring James Brolin. In 2005, the Amityville horror returned to the big screen with Ryan Reynolds stepping into the role of George Lutz, following in the footsteps of James Brolin. Both movies stayed true to the eerie backstory of the infamous house where a gruesome mass murder had taken place, but they each took creative liberties to crank up the terror. Then there's how the house itself is portrayed. The older film leans into the idea that the house is a sinister entity influencing Ronald DeFeo Jr. to kill his family in 1974, while the remake shifts the horror to the ghosts of the victims, making them the primary source of terror. The priest who tried to help the Lutz family also meets different fates depending on the version. In the book, he hears a voice commanding him to get out and later becomes ill, eventually giving up on helping the family. The films, however, escalate the horror, showing him being attacked by swarms of supernatural flies and even going blind. Regardless of these differences, one chilling fact remains: an entire family was murdered in that house. Yet despite the Lutz family's claims of paranormal experiences in 1975, no other owners have reported hauntings since. According to the Washington Post and real estate firm Coldwell Banker, Harbor Light, 4 different families have lived in the house after the Lutzes. A previous owner even had the address changed to avoid unwanted attention. The last time the house went up for sale was in the summer of 2016, and it was sold in February 2017 for just over $600,000, significantly less than the $950,000 it was purchased for in 2010. As for the real murders that took place, while Butch was eventually found dead in his prison cell, there are countless versions of events and interviews he gave before his death. In an interview from 1986, Butch claimed that his sister Dawn killed their father, and that their mother killed his siblings before he killed her. He later filed a motion in 1990 stating that Dawn and an unknown assailant were the real killers, that he only shot Dawn by accident during a struggle. Despite his shifting stories, his claims were always met with skepticism. In 2000, he spoke with author R.I. Auna, asserting that his parents plotted to kill him, which led him to join forces with Dawn and others in desperation. Butch's narrative continued to evolve, becoming increasingly distant with details about the events and unreliable witnesses. His claims, including involvement from his wife Geraldine Gates, only deepened the mystery, with authorities and experts disproving many of his assertions. Now, it's easy to lean toward the idea that Butch was simply a psychopath driven by childhood trauma or addiction, who saw no problem in killing his family. However, if the lingering souls of his victims did haunt the Lutz family, we can only hope they found justice and peace. The saga of the DeFeo family in the house at 112 Ocean Avenue remains one of the most haunting and enigmatic chapters in American crime and lore. From Ronald Butch's cold-blooded slaughter of his family in 1974 to the Lutz family's harrowing 28-day ordeal a year later, the Amityville horror transcends a mere murder case, weaving a tapestry of trauma, mystery, and supernatural intrigue. Butch's shifting confessions and unrepentant nature leave us questioning whether his actions stem from a fractured mind or something darker, while the Lutz's flight from inexplicable terror suggests the house itself may hold echoes of its violent past. Decades later, with Butch gone and the house standing quietly under new ownership, its legacy endures, immortalized in books and films, yet shrouded in doubt. Whether driven by human evil or lingering spirits, the tragedy of Amityville serves as a chilling reminder of the shadows that can lurk within families and homes, leaving us to wonder where the line between reality and nightmare truly lies. Jessica Edens was born on January 22, 1981, in a small suburb of New York State, USA. She came from a large family, with a sister named Diane and two half-brothers, Nathan and Adam. Jessica spent her early years surrounded by loving parents and siblings, with whom she developed warm relationships. She didn't have outstanding academic success but was always creative, dreaming of becoming a photographer. When her parents recognized this passion, they bought her an amateur camera, which she carried everywhere. She took pictures of people, nature, cities, and architecture, anything that caught her attention. Her work was admired and praised. During her teenage years, Jessica actively pursued this passion and mastered the craft. She began to shoot weddings and various events, initially for free, then for a small fee. This allowed her to earn enough money for her own needs, and the idea of building a real business became increasingly appealing. Jessica's personal life was also progressing. She was sociable, active, attractive, and always attracted a lot of attention. On November 19, 2007, she gave birth to a son named Hayden King. Jessica became pregnant during a rapidly developing relationship with a young man, but the love between them faded quickly, and they broke up before Hayden was born. However, Jessica remained optimistic and maintained friendly relations with the child's biological father, allowing him to communicate with Hayden. Jessica was determined to provide everything her child needed, regardless of whether she had a partner or was raising him as a single mother. Fortunately, she did not have to be alone for long. In 2008, Jessica met a man named Benjamin Edens. They quickly found common ground, grew closer, and within a few meetings, they could not imagine their lives without each other. They was in no hurry to officially register their marriage, as both were creative individuals who understood each other well. After a few months, they moved in together, and Jessica began to contemplate having more children. After a while, they officially got married in 2010. Shortly thereafter, they decided to move to a new large house located in a small, cozy town in Easley, South Carolina, which was ideal for a quiet family life. Their family relationships flourished, and Jessica was convinced she had found the man of her dreams, a feeling that was mutual. 2 years later, on July 19, 2012, they welcomed a daughter named Harper Edens. Jessica believes this further strengthens her relationship with Benjamin. He was a wonderful father who spent all his free time with Harper. He also became so close to Hayden that the boy did not suspect Benjamin was not his biological father. By 2017, Hayden was in the 4th grade, while his younger sister Harper was about to start 1st grade in the fall. This was an exciting milestone. From the outside, Jessica's family appeared perfect. She had 2 children, a beloved job, and a husband whom she described to everyone as the best person. Her eldest child was a good student, and the family expected the same from Harper. Jessica's passion for photography thrived, but when she had her daughter, she decided to take a break and become a housewife, stepping back from her small but successful photo business. However, as Harper grew more independent, Jessica returned to attending various events to conduct professional photography. To simplify her client search, she created a website where she introduced herself as a photographer from Greenville. Jessica described her life as perfect, but, as often happens, things were exaggerated. Behind the facade of love and understanding, difficulties began to arise in the marriage. Over time, Benjamin's feelings cooled, and tension accumulated between them. Jessica wanted to understand what was happening as she began to notice uncharacteristic behaviors in her husband. He would come home from work, immediately run into the shower without even saying hello to his wife and children, as if he were trying to hide something. More and more often, he stayed at work much longer than his shift lasted, citing overtime and global projects that no one could confirm. He began to actively engage in sports, carefully monitored his appearance, and switched to healthy eating. All this could look like ordinary healthy habits that people develop with age, but not with Jessica. She began to suspect Benjamin of cheating. Quickly, a suitable candidate for an affair appeared. A young, attractive woman had recently started at her husband's workplace. This woman's name was Meredith Rahm. She was born on October 29, 1988, in Collierville, Tennessee. In Jessica's opinion, it was on Meredith that her husband had set his eyes. In the early years of Meredith's life, her parents divorced, and her mother quickly found a new man and remarried, so Meredith had a stepfather named Carlton Chambers. He was a worthy person and became like a second father to her. The family in which she grew up was friendly and loving. Meredith had a younger sister named Brittany Rowell. She dedicated herself to her studies from an early age and was focused on career success. She studied well and was creative, like Jessica, but family and children were of little interest to her. In 2009, she graduated from the University of Memphis with a bachelor's degree in international business. After gaining some necessary experience, she moved to Greenville. Meredith was very independent and self-confident, which immediately caught Benjamin's eye. By the time they met, Meredith had started working at the same company as Benjamin. In fact, Jessica's suspicions were justified. Immediately after meeting Meredith, her husband became attracted to her. Their feelings come from both sides. They started dating in secret, and their affair continued for a year. Now, Benjamin finally realized that he wanted to be with his young mistress and wanted to break up with Jessica, but he didn't know how to approach the issue. He was afraid of offending his wife and wanted to avoid the difficulties of the divorce process. For a long time, Benjamin was torn between his family and his mistress. His wife's suspicions only aggravated the situation. The more accusations she made, the more inevitable the breakup felt, which provoked constant quarrels. Jessica did not trust her husband and wanted to find out what was going on. He tried to distance himself, but this could not go on forever. It was time to tell the truth, but Benjamin could not bring himself to do it. Instead of confessing, he decided to move out on far-fetched grounds, citing constant pressure from his wife. On April 11, 2017, Benjamin packed his things and moved from the shared family home to a rented apartment. At least that is what he initially told his wife. Jessica kept hoping that these were only temporary difficulties that many people experience, and that their marriage would be saved. She believed she could convince her husband to return to her and their children. Benjamin tried to avoid the topic of separation altogether, reluctantly answered calls and messages, which only offended her more. The betrayal was of such a magnitude that she could not forgive it. She was angry, and her hopes for a family reunion were shattered. But most of all, she was furious that Benjamin simply ignored her. As the persecution began, Jessica spread various damaging facts about Meredith on all social networks and on any sites where she could post information, exposing her as the homewrecker and her husband as a cheater. Jessica continued to communicate regularly with Benjamin, trying to win him back. Instead, he finally decided to file for divorce. Telling Jessica this provoked even more anger from her, and she now decided to annoy him as much as possible. She knew how much Benjamin loved their daughter Harper, so she sought sole custody of the girl. He had always been a caring father and loved the children, including Hayden. Therefore, he was against such a decision. Benjamin wanted to maintain the right to communicate with the children. He did not want to sit idly by. He hoped to smooth over the conflict and therefore proposed joint custody. Jessica was adamant. Against this backdrop, a serious custody battle began, and tensions escalated. Realizing that it would not be possible to agree amicably, Benjamin went to court on July 11th. He wanted to gain an advantage and testified under oath that Jessica was using the children as a weapon of revenge. By this point, Jessica had completely prevented meetings and communication between the children with their father, not even allowing contact through social networks and mobile phones. Everything was under her total control. Benjamin was afraid she could go too far. Simultaneously, Jessica intensified her harassment of Benjamin and Meredith. She continued to post not just hateful words toward Meredith on social media but also used graphic photos and other offensive captions. Previously, Jessica had tried to portray Benjamin's mistress as a family destroyer. Now, even more disturbing captions began to appear. She claimed that Meredith would get what she deserved, though she never specified what she meant. Meredith, the target of the harassment, began to fear that all of this could be dangerous. However, Benjamin insisted that Jessica had no history of violence, so he believed the situation would gradually settle down. He tried not to provoke her further, but it had little effect. The situation only worsened. When Jessica learned about the filing of a joint custody application by her husband, she was furious. Benjamin had always been a decent person, a valuable employee who earned a good salary and had no bad habits or addictions, so there were no serious grounds for denying him custody or terminating his contact with the children. He simply wanted to see them. Now that he had received the right to visit, which Jessica could not oppose. Due to the impossibility of taking revenge, she began to come up with more sophisticated ways to annoy him. Every short communication with Benjamin ended in conflicts and accusations. It was even more annoying to her that the mistress would be in contact with the children. During this period, Benjamin and Meredith regularly contacted the police to complain about Jessica's behavior. In particular, Meredith could no longer tolerate the publications that Jessica made about her daily on various social networks. She starts having problems at work when Jessica tries to turn things around her. Benjamin tried to prove that Jessica's behavior was stalking and very disturbing. Worse, he began receiving frightening messages from Jessica, all concerning the children. It seemed she was trying to intimidate him with ambiguous phrases, and he worried that his daughter might be in danger. In July 2017, after a court meeting, he called the police to check on the welfare of the children at Jessica's house. He described the situation in detail. He felt powerless since Jessica still interfered with the meetings, and he did not want to use force, fearing she would use this in court against him to strip him of his joint custody rights. The officers who responded reported that everything was fine, but the anxiety from the threats continued to grow. On July 12th, they discussed joint custody again. All attempts by Jessica to prevent this were unsuccessful, making her even more furious. During the day, Benjamin begins to receive more disturbing messages from his ex-wife. It was obvious to her that there was no legal way to limit the children's communication with their father, so she tried to irritate him further with her frightening messages. Benjamin contacted the police again and asked the patrol officers to go to the family home to check on the children's well-being. When the officers arrived, they again did not see anything suspicious. The report compiled by the patrolman stated that everything was fine, the family seemed normal, Jessica behaved calmly, and her son and daughter were in a good mood while watching a movie when the officers arrived. At that moment, Jessica insisted that Harper call Benjamin, realizing that he had called the police. All of this became part of her insidious plan to expose him as a liar. While the officer was in the house, he discussed the potential resumption of relations with Benjamin. Jessica denied wanting to reconcile, calling him a traitor who had cheated for a whole year. She couldn't forgive him and intended to use this in court to achieve sole custody of their daughter. She didn't want him in the children's lives. While the officer was filling out the report, Jessica began insisting that Benjamin and Meredith were very dangerous people, especially to the children. She claimed to have suffered from their behavior since the divorce process began and insisted that they were trying to portray her in a bad light. Jessica wanted to obtain a restraining order against them. The patrolman informed Jessica that, in order to get a restraining order, she would have to go through the court process after filing a report. After saying goodbye to the officers, she promised to file a statement in person soon, but that was not destined to happen. The next day, while Jessica's family was out of town, she went to her parents' house early in the morning and took a .40 caliber pistol that they used for self-defense. When relatives heard about this, Jessica warned her father about the need for a weapon, and he was not against it. They did not suspect the scale of the persecution that Jessica had arranged. She skillfully lied, making Benjamin look worse and referring to the persecution from him, that the danger emanating from her ex. Jessica claimed that she could not feel calm at home, she was simply afraid to be left alone with her 2 children. They were easily convinced that Benjamin and Meredith posed a threat, including to the children, and that the weapon would help protect them from what she described as extremely harmful communication. All of this sounded plausible, therefore, her parents had no problem with her needing the weapon for a while. Jessica planned to keep the gun in the house while the divorce process was ongoing. Jessica then sent text messages filled with accusations, now targeting everyone who knew Meredith. She managed to find information about the family and friends of Meredith, copying the messages to everyone, then telling them how Meredith had stolen her husband, destroyed her family, and was now trying to take the children. Jessica obtained the phone numbers of at least 5 friends of family members on social media. It seems she was immersed in this all day, displaying behavior that resembled madness. She even personally called several people, relaying her story over her mobile phone. Some of Jessica's acquaintances became disappointed in her decency, causing real damage to her reputation. Benjamin also received even more terrifying messages. Jessica openly accused and intimidated him, stating that he would not receive anything, he would not gain access to Meredith and the children. Jessica wrote that because of his actions, he would have no chance of getting any of it, as she would not allow him to enjoy life after what he had done. Benjamin was extremely worried about this information and began to send Jessica message after message, trying to understand what she meant. However, she simply ignored all his questions, which only increased Benjamin's anxiety. He expressed his willingness to go to court for an emergency hearing regarding joint custody of the children, even threatened to try to take the children from her if she did not calm down. Finally, Jessica responded with a short message, "Your life will soon be better." Benjamin was sure that she was just mocking him and enjoying this situation. Jessica claimed that it was the last day she would experience pain, after which she ignored any attempts by Benjamin to contact her. On the morning of July 13, 2017, Jessica wrote to Benjamin again. She offered to meet so that Benjamin could answer some questions. However, Benjamin found everything very suspicious and hesitated to attend the meeting. He didn't suspect that this could turn out to be a fatal mistake. Benjamin tried to get her to talk on the phone to understand what she needed and why they couldn't discuss it without a meeting, but this only made Jessica even angrier. At 4:41 p.m., he received another message in which Jessica complained that she was tired of this bullying that never meant anything to Benjamin. In reality, old accusations and the most frightening threats she had ever voiced since the breakup emerged. Jessica's behavior was so alarming that Benjamin contacted her mother to discuss the situation, suspecting that Jessica was having a breakdown. He feared she could not control herself, might pose a danger to herself and the children. At that time, he was at work and could not leave. He did not suspect that while he was talking to Jessica's mother, Jessica was already driving to his apartment with bad intentions. At about 5 p.m., Jessica parked her car near the complex where Benjamin and Meredith lived. In the parking lot, Jessica saw Meredith, who had just returned from work and was sitting in her car, distracted by the mail on her mobile phone. Jessica approached her, pointed a gun, and shot through the glass, instantly killing her rival, whom she considered the cause of all her troubles. All this happened in broad daylight. As people were returning from work, the noise attracted numerous witnesses. After the incident, people saw Jessica get into her car and drive away. Neighbors contacted the police, reporting this and clarifying one frightening detail: at that time, there were 2 children in the car with the shooter. Witnesses described the shooter, and the police understood who they were talking about. They assumed that Benjamin was in danger. Jessica had enough time to act, but she was not going to go to Benjamin's workplace. Instead, she devised something much more sophisticated and stayed one step ahead of law enforcement. While the authorities were still looking for her in the city and were awaiting Benjamin's arrival at work, Jessica called Benjamin, told him that everyone he loved had left and that she would be next. Then Jessica hung up. It was the last call she made. Police eventually traced the call and went to Easley, 7 miles from the Benjamin home, where they saw her Jeep. The doors of the car were locked from the inside, and the engine was still running. Inside, they found 3 bodies, 2 children and Jessica herself, who was 36 years old. Jessica had persistently called Benjamin in hopes of meeting with him, perhaps intending him to be her first victim. However, he seemed to sense danger and avoided contact as much as possible, often opting to respond via a message on a messaging app. When she received a refusal, she flared up in anger and attacked Meredith, after which Jessica returned home. Near her house, she called Benjamin again. After a meaningless conversation, Jessica first attacked her 5-year-old daughter, then her 9-year-old son, after which she turned the gun on herself. Jessica used the same gun that she had borrowed from her parents on July 11th. During the investigation, detectives found out that Benjamin had been trying to obtain a restraining order against Jessica. He had filed for joint custody on the same day and had communicated with the police officer who came to check on the children. Jessica left 4 suicide notes, 1 for her mother, 1 for her father, 1 for her son's father, and 1 for her husband. In these notes, she expressed her love for her family and her regret for the pain her actions would cause them. Jessica insisted that she could no longer live with these feelings and believed that her children would also suffer without her, so she decided to take not only her life but theirs as well. In the letter to her son's father, she expressed gratitude for giving her her first child and apologized for the pain she had caused. Considering the content of these notes, the police investigated suspicions of domestic violence against the children. Judging by what Jessica wrote, it was possible she had harmed them as a way of exacting revenge on her unfaithful husband. However, nothing like this could be confirmed. As for the last note left by Jessica to Benjamin, it contained several short phrases in which she wished that Benjamin would experience the pain from his cruel act for the rest of his life. The note also stated that he would not be able to hurt them anymore. Among all the individuals involved in this case, Benjamin was the only survivor. The note turned out to be prophetic. Even to this day, he continues to live with the pain of losing his loved ones.